Han Li hovered in midair in the distance and was not in the hurry to return to that spot. Instead, after a brief hesitation, he closed his eyes and released his powerful spiritual sense, which encompassed an area with a radius of around 50 kilometers. There were no other phenomena to be seen. The unfathomably massive creature had indeed disappeared. Han Li didn't hesitate any longer as he sent his spiritual sense plunging into the ocean, attempting to assess the situation down below. A short while later, Han Li abruptly opened his eyes as a hint of bewilderment appeared on his face. After a brief moment of contemplation, he suddenly patted the storage pouch on his waist. A silver light flashed and an azure figure appeared before him. It was none other than the humanoid puppet. "Go!" Han Li issued a command as he swept his sleeve downward. The humanoid puppet immediately transformed into a streak of silver light and hurtled toward the ocean, covering several kilometers in just a few flashes. A short while later, the silver streak of light reached the location where the ghost mist had appeared earlier before plunging downward without any hesitation. The humanoid puppet immediately disappeared deep into the ocean. Han Li sat in midair with his legs folded in front of him, using his spiritual sense to form a connection with the humanoid puppet, thereby allowing him to manipulate it as if it were an avatar of his. The seabed nearby was far deeper than the seabed in the surrounding ocean. Only after plunging down to a depth of around 40,000 to 50,000 did the humanoid puppet reach the bottom. However, there was absolutely nothing there. Not only were there no demon beasts around, there wasn't even any coral or seaweed around. Furthermore, the terrain was far too flat to be normal without any undulation in the topography at all. The humanoid puppet searched through the surrounding area before suddenly rushing toward a certain direction. After a short while, it discovered a ball of azure light hovering in the water several kilometers away. The ball of light was rising and sinking erratically, as if it possessed a spiritual nature. Golden light suddenly shot forth from the humanoid puppet's eyes as the speed at which it was traveling increased severalfold. After just a few flashes, it was only just over 100 feet away from the ball of light. At this point, it was finally able to identify that there was a feather roughly 10 feet in length within the ball of light. The feather was shimmering with faint spiritual light, as if it were a living creature. Silver light flashed from the humanoid puppet's body once again, taking it directly above the feather. It immediately reached down for the feather without any hesitation in an attempt to grab it. However, a surprising turn of events unfolded. The puppet's fingertip was flashing with silver light, and soon as it came into contact with the azure light, the light around feather suddenly intensified as it blurred into non-existence, seemingly as if it had disappeared into thin air. As a result, the puppet only managed to grab a hold of empty space. The humanoid puppet faltered slightly, seemingly also a little shocked by this development. However, in the next instant, azure light flashed over 300 feet away, and the feather reappeared, as if it had always been there. Letter 1D65B, letter 1D493, letter 1D4E, letter 1D486, letter 1D500, letter 1D486, letter 1D484, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4F6. This time, the puppet chose to observe the azure feather as opposed to acting recklessly. However, the feather began to drift into the distance again. The puppet didn't let it drift far, however, as it sprang into action again when the azure feather had drifted just over 1,000 feet away. Silver light flashed as the puppet transformed into a silver streak of light before appearing above the feather. However, on this occasion, it didn't make a grab for it with its hand. Instead, it waved its hand through the air. A shimmering silver hand of light appeared before reaching for the feather in its stead. The same thing happened again. The azure light shuddered slightly before the feather teleported away again. However, when it reappeared again this time, loud thunderclaps suddenly erupted above it as golden lightning came crashing down from above, instantly ensnaring it in a net of golden lightning. The feather flashed violently and teleported several times in quick succession, but it would always be rebounded mercilessly by the golden light as soon as it reappeared, rendering its teleportation ability completely useless. At this moment, a humanoid figure appeared in the air above the golden net of lightning. This was none other than Han Li himself, who had also ventured down into the bottom of the ocean. Han Li looked at the azure feather trapped in the golden net and clicked his tongue in wonder. This item appeared to be simply extraordinary. Not only was it emanating azure spiritual light, upon closer inspection, Han Li discovered that the patterns on its surface were constructed from all types of mysterious runes were layered on top of one another, and only faintly discernible. However, a small section of the feather's tip had been charred black, and there were a few crimson marks on its end, within which wisps of golden light were flashing. Han Li was naturally aware of the fact that this was definitely some sort of rare treasure. Thus, an elated expression appeared on his face as he patted his storage pouch, instantly producing several talismans in the process. He raised a hand, and one of the talismans shot forth toward the net. However, azure light flashed, and the feather seemed to have adopted an insubstantial state of being, allowing the talismans to pass directly through it. Han Li's expression faltered upon seeing this, and rather than being enraged by this development, he was ecstatic. This item possessed an extremely potent spiritual nature, thereby lending further support to the notion that it was an extraordinary treasure. Thus, he immediately made a hand seal and began to chant something. The golden lightning net contracted drastically to a radius of around 10 feet at his behest, affording the azure feather no avenue for retreat or evasion. He then opened his mouth to expel a mouthful of blood essence onto the talisman in his hand. At the same time, he cast a series of incantation seals in quick succession, all of which disappeared into the talisman. After releasing that talisman, the azure feather in the golden net attempted to evade it again, but the talisman stuck to it like glue. The azure light receded, and the feather took on a much more mundane appearance. Only then did Han Li withdraw his divine devilbane lightning and feigned a grabbing motion, upon which the hovering azure feather was drawn to his hand. Upon careful inspection, he abruptly raised his eyebrows as he gently tapped the feather with his finger. An incredible scene ensued. Faint spiritual light began to shimmer around the azure feather, and it rapidly shrank to around a foot in length in the blink of an eye. Furthermore, the talisman that was stuck to the feather had also shrunk along with it. That was quite an interesting observation. Han Li stirred slightly as he held onto the shaft of the feather and waved it gently. Azure light instantly erupted from the feather, sweeping up an extremely powerful gust of wind attribute spiritual power. The spiritual power was extremely pure, and Han Li was delighted to make this discovery. However, this wasn't the time to be contemplating how to use this treasure. As such, Han Li stored it into a jade box before putting it into his storage pouch. He then deployed the humanoid puppet again to search for any other noteworthy items in the surrounding area. However, Han Li was already very satisfied. As such, he didn't linger any longer in this area. He withdrew the humanoid puppet and flew away from this place as a streak of azure light. During the rest of his journey to Green Spirit Island, Han Li began to carefully contemplate the incidents surrounding the giant beast and the ghost mist. It was quite clear that the battle he had just witnessed was far beyond something that any cultivator in the human world could interfere with. That giant beast seemed to be a powerful demon from the spirit realm or some other alternate realm. Furthermore, that ghost mist seemed to be alive and also appeared to be more powerful than the giant beast. That was quite a shocking revelation to Han Li at the time. The only living beings in the human world that could be so astonishing had to those legendary devils. Back when he had been trapped in the Umbra realm, he had suspected that the Umbra realm had somehow been related to Devil Luo Mayan. After all, only half-spirit, half-demon beings like them would possess the incredible ability to easily tear through space and travel throughout the realms. That unfathomably massive beast appeared to also possess power that defied the natural order. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to forcibly attack the ghost mist through the boundary between realms. With Han Li's vast reserves of experience, in conjunction with the knowledge he had gleaned from reading the many ancient tomes that he had, he could roughly make sense of what he had just witnessed. However, no matter how spot-on he was with his speculation, fearsome beings like Luo Mayan were far too powerful for him to do anything against. As such, he could only treat that as a bizarre experience. 2 months and a day later, Han Li was just flying over the ocean when his expression suddenly changed, and he shot forth in a certain direction. He had only traveled a few kilometers when bursts of explosive booms erupted up ahead. In the distance, not too far away from his current location, spiritual light was flashing incessantly as 3 cultivators were fighting for their lives, trying to ward off a high-grade demon beast. Among the 3 of them, one was an early core formation cultivator, while the other 2 were only at the late foundation establishment stage. Unfortunately for them, that demon core was at the 6th grade. Even after the 3 of them combined their powers, they could only just barely ensure self-preservation. Han Li stopped in midair and began to carefully appraise this battle. core formation cultivator was a middle-aged man wearing a conical bamboo hat that obscured most of his face. His skin appeared to be quite dark, and he was manipulating a yellow flying sword, with which he was taking on most of the demon beast's attacks. As for the other two late Foundation establishment cultivators, one of them was an elderly man with white hair, while the other was a young woman who appeared to be around 17 or 18 years of age. They were wielding an azure flying trident and a fiery crimson wheel, respectively, and they seemed to be rather powerful as well. The sixth-grade demon beast before them had white mist enshrouding its entire body, and the sound of a crying infant could be heard coming from its mouth. Furthermore, balls of blue lightning were shooting forth from within the white mist. This was the first high-grade demon beast he had encountered in the scattered star seas, an infant carp beast. However, this beast was significantly larger than the one he had seen before. Furthermore, it had 4 fair and tender arms, and the 4 treasures that it was wielding were also quite remarkable. They consisted of a saber, a sword, a drum, and a flag. Among the 4 treasures, the saber, sword, and flag were only relatively rare top-grade treasure. However, that small yellow drum was a powerful ancient treasure that was able to summon silver ripples, which appeared to be quite powerful. Han Li's arrival had clearly attracted the attention of both parties. Upon identifying the fact that Han Li was a human, the man wearing the conical bamboo hat was overjoyed, and he yelled, "I am Chen Jing of Lightning Sky Island. If you're willing to lend us your assistance, I'll be sure to reward you handsomely following this battle." Due to the fact that most of his attention was focused on handling the demon beast, the man didn't even have the spare capacity to use his spiritual sense to detect Han Li's cultivation base. As such, he merely assumed that Han Li was just another core formation cultivator who just so happened to be passing by. After all, the speed at which Han Li had been traveling was similar to that of a core formation cultivator. However, the 6th-grade infant carp beast had already developed some level O intelligence. After using its spiritual sense to detect Han Li's cultivation base, a horrified expression immediately appeared on its face. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face, and before he had even given a response to those cultivators, the beast suddenly let loose a ghastly cry. All of a sudden, over 100 balls of blue lightning shot forth from its white mist in unison, flying toward the 3 cultivators. At the same time, it had already emerged from the mist and was plummeting like a shooting star toward the ocean down below as quickly as possible. The 3 cultivators were thrown into a slight panic in the face of so many balls of lightning, and they were completely unable to pay any heed to the escaping infant carp beast. However, Han Li's expression darkened upon seeing this, and he swept his sleeve through the air in the demon beast's direction. A flying sword that was around a foot in length shot forth from his sleeve, shuddering slightly before transforming into a streak of golden light over 100 feet long, which flew through the air. The sword was so fast that the infant carp beast only saw a flash of golden light, followed by a split second of excruciating pain, before it was unable to feel nor see anything ever again. The golden light sped around the demon beast a few times, and large clouds of blood mist erupted into the sky, slicing the beast into 7 or 8 pieces. Even its soul didn't have a chance to escape before it, too, was destroyed. The segments of its body came plummeting down from above. At this moment, Han Li reached out a feigned a grabbing motion. One section of the demon beast's body suddenly exploded, and a blue bead shot forth from within its flesh and blood, flying toward Han Li as a streak of blue light. Han Li closed his 5 fingers, and the infant carp beast's demon core had already ended up in his hand. He looked at the demon core in a nonchalant manner, without any hint of emotion in his eyes. A demon core of this caliber naturally wasn't going to catch his eyes. Following the death of the demon beast, the balls of lightning frantically attacking the 3 cultivators also disappeared in the flash. The 3 of them heaved a collective sigh of relief, before turning to Han Li with awe and veneration in their eyes. They were unable to chase down the infant carp beast earlier, but they had clearly witnessed the scenes in which Han Li destroyed that 6th-grade demon beast with ease. It was not difficult to imagine their astonishment. They had thought that at most, Han Li would only be a core formation cultivator who just so happened to be passing by, but who would have thought that he would be a nascent soul cultivator? However, this place was already quite far into the outer seas. Cultivators of Han Li's caliber were still rare here, but 3 of them had encountered a few in the past, so they weren't overly flustered. Thus, the 3 cultivators hurriedly stowed away their treasures before drifting over to Han Li. Before they had even reached the Han Li, The man in the conical bamboo had extended a deep bow toward him. Chen Jing of the Xianxia Sect pays his respects to Senior. Thank you for your assistance, Senior. We've been tangled up in a battle with this demon beast for a long time, and it would have been very difficult for us to escape on our own. May I have the honor of knowing your name, Senior? The man was surreptitiously sizing up Han Li as he spoke. His expression was quite respectful, but he spoke in a manner that was neither haughty nor humble. Azure Yang Sect, your Lord Three Yang's disciple. Han Li faltered slightly upon hearing this before a hint of surprise appeared on his face. Lord Three Yang is indeed my master. Do you recognize him, Senior? The man scanned over Han Li's body with his spiritual sense, but was unable to detect his cultivation base. He was most likely a nascent soul stage powerful being. He found it slightly perplexing that he was unable to ascertain Han Li's cultivation base, but automatically assumed him to be an early nascent soul cultivator. After all, mid-nascent soul and late-nascent soul cultivators were all extremely renowned. I've heard of your master yet never seen him, Han Li chuckled. At the mention of the Azure Yang Sect and Lord Three Yang, he naturally thought back to Yuan Yao's experiences with them. She had slain the young master of the Azure Yang Sect, which led to her being hunted by the entire sect. Even though Lord Three Yang was quite a renowned figure in the scattered star seas, in Han Li's eyes, he was merely a mid-nascent soul cultivator who wasn't worthy of his attention. Aside from that, he had no vendetta against the Azure Yang Sect, so he certainly wasn't going to kill these three in cold blood. Next, he began to ask them some questions. The three of you must be quite familiar with this area, right? Do you know the specific location of the Green Spirit Island? Han Li's sea charts were very detailed, but it was no easy task trying to find an island in this boundless ocean. As such, he certainly wasn't going to give up on the opportunity to make an inquiry to these three cultivators. At the mention of Green Spirit Island, smiles appeared on the faces of the Azure Yang Sect cultivators. Senior, you're trying to get to Green Spirit Island to obtain high-grade spirit stones, right? If that's the case, then there's no need for you to travel all the way to Green Spirit Island. You can purchase spirit stones from the markets nearby. Of course, if you're familiar with the mine guards from the Starfall Coalition or the Star Palace, you'll naturally be able to get a better price. Markets, how many high-grade spirit stones can be found there? I require more than just one or two, Han Li replied in a skeptical manner. I'm sure the markets will be able to satisfy your needs, Senior. High-grade spirit stones are technically equivalent to over 10,000 spirit stones, but in reality, the price at which they're sold is over twice that amount. As long as you're not looking for more than 30 or 40 high-grade spirit stones at once, those markets will be able to provide them, Chen Jing replied with a smile. In that case, then take me to the markets first. If there aren't enough spirit stones there, then I'll make a trip to Green Spirit Island. You can take this demon core as remuneration for leading the way. Han Li tossed the infant carp beast's demon core toward them as he spoke. Chen Jing caught the demon core and was immediately ecstatic. Don't worry, Senior. We've been residing around this area for over 10 years, so we know everything there is to know about these markets. We'll be sure not to disappoint you. The Azure Yang Sect cultivators were still rather confused about Han Li's identity, but a 6th-grade demon core would rake in a large sum of spirit stones for a core formation cultivator, particularly when all they had to do in exchange for it was to lead the way to the market. They were naturally overjoyed. As for the elderly man and the young woman, their cultivation bases were inferior to Chen Jing's, so he naturally made all of the executive decisions for their group. However, they were even more fearful when they looked at Han Li now. After all, the disparity between foundation establishment and nascent soul cultivators was simply massive. Thus, Han Li was led by Chen Jing's trio away from this place. According to their description, this location was only about half a month's travel away from Green Spirit Island, and on the way there, they would pass by the island on which the three of them inhabited. They flew toward the eastern direction almost without any pause for rest, and after flying for over 10 days, an unknown island finally appeared up ahead. This island appeared to be quite large, several thousand kilometers in radius. The island had an undulating terrain filled with lush hills and mountains. This is Lightning Sky Island. I have a simple abode here, so I'm very familiar with the markets in this area. The market here is also one of the largest near Green Spirit Island, so I'm sure it won't disappoint you, Senior. Chen Jing explained with a smile on his face as he flew through the air. The spirit vein on this island is not bad. It's no wonder that so many cultivators are staying on this island. Han Li nodded as he looked into the distance. Not only is the spirit vein on Lightning Sky Island the best among the surrounding few islands, the island also produces several types of rare medicines. Both the Starfall Coalition and the Star Palace have set their eyes on the island before, but they were both wary of one another and allowed other powers to take joint ownership of the island instead, Chen Jing said in a slightly boastful manner. Those so-called other powers include your Azure Yang sect, right? Han Li chuckled. Ahem. Our Azure Yang sect does have a few people living on this island, but we wouldn't dare to claim ownership over any part of it, Chen Jing chuckled drily. There seemed to be some hardships involved that he was reluctant to talk about. Han Li naturally wasn't actually interested in the Azure Yang sect. As such, he merely smiled and set the topic aside. After that, Chen Jing began to introduce the powers on the island, as well as the several nascent soul cultivators here. Han Li heard the name of a familiar person from Chen Jing's description, and he faltered lightly before exclaiming, Taoist Master Swift Crane, the one from the Jade Cloud sect. He's also on this island. I heard that he was severely wounded many years ago. Chen Jing's heart stirred slightly, but he still gave an honest response. You know about Senior Swift Crane as well, Senior. His body was once destroyed many years ago, but he was saved by the Jade Cloud sect and managed to recover his cultivation base through possession. I heard that he had intentions of taking over the island for the Jade Cloud sect, but he wasn't the only one with such intentions, so in the end, the island was split among several powers. I see. Han Li replied in a neutral manner, making it impossible for Chen Jing to glean his thoughts. Before they knew it, the four of them had reached the island and were flying directly toward the center of the island. After flying for a short while longer, a small city nestled between several tall mountains appeared before their eyes. It was quite clear that this city had only been constructed not long ago. It wasn't very large in area, only around a dozen or so square kilometers, and all of the buildings in the city were constructed from large gray-white stones, creating a pristine and orderly sight to behold. There appeared to be city gates on all four sides of the city, but only chi condensation cultivators used those gates. All of the more powerful cultivators capable of flight chose to take aerial routes. It appeared to be a lively and bustling city. Han Li's eyes narrowed as he suddenly asked, how many cultivators are there living on this island? Are they all here in this city? Chen Jing faltered slightly upon hearing this before replying after some contemplation. There are no exact population figures, but if the chi condensation cultivators are taken into account as well, then there are probably 30,000 to 40,000 inhabitants. Most of them live in this city, while others are distributed over other spots on the island. There are even some powerful cultivators who have blasted cave abodes for themselves into the faces of mountains. I see. Han Li nodded with a thoughtful expression and didn't raise any other questions. The three of them reached the city a short while later. At their altitude, they were able to clearly see everything within the small city. Han Li swept his gaze down below and developed a slight interest in the stone towers situated at the center of the city, which were extending into the sky like 8 heavenly pillars. The stone towers were circular in shape and every one of them appeared to be around 500 to 600 feet tall. Their surfaces were bumpy and uneven, with many mysterious runes and formation spells carved into the stone. These runes and formations were shimmering with feeble spiritual light and were extremely attention-grabbing. Even Han Li couldn't help but take a few more glances at the towers. Those 8 stone towers can activate the city's protective formation. They were designed by a renowned formation master in our scattered star seas. Once activated, the formation's power is definitely not inferior to the protective formation of the major sects. The towers have foundation establishment cultivators stationed in them 24 hours a day in order to ensure that they can be activated at any moment. This formation has saved the city from destruction on several occasions and has proved to be extremely useful. Han Li's heart stirred upon hearing this as he asked, "Oh, are there demon beasts attacking this island?" Please be at ease, Senior. I'm referring to events that took place many years in the past. Ever since the mines on Green Spirit Island were split among us humans and demon beasts, those demon beasts have never attacked this island again. Let's get down now. The market is just over there, and I happen to know a few shops that specialize in selling high-grade spirit stones. I can introduce them to you, Senior. Chen Hing replied with a smile before pointing toward the southern region of the city, awaiting further instructions from Han Li. Han Li turned toward the direction that Chen Jing was pointing to find that there were some buildings there that were indeed different from others. All of them were remarkably tall and large, with the smallest pavilions being 2 or 3 levels tall, and the largest at 4 or 5 levels in height. There were steady streams of cultivators entering and exiting the doors of these pavilions, creating a much more lively scene than anywhere else in the city. Han Li nodded, but to the three cultivators' surprise, he said, "There's no need for an introduction. I'll get down there and have a look for myself. You three can go now." "Yes," Chen Jing was slightly taken aback, but he didn't dare to object as he bowed respectfully. Han Li turned to the three of them and suddenly said in a cold voice, "I don't want anyone else to know about the fact that I came to this island. You know what you should do, right?" "Please rest assured, Senior, we won't tell anyone anything." Chen Jing's heart jolted with shock, but he still maintained a respectful expression. I hope you're telling the truth," Han Li chuckled in response, but he suddenly flicked a finger that was hidden in his sleeve. Immediately thereafter, his body swayed and he disappeared amid a flash of azure light. The three cultivators' expressions changed drastically, and they hurriedly looked around, only to find that Han Li was nowhere to be seen. "Marshal Uncle Chen, don't say anything, let's go back first." The young woman wanted to say something, but Chen Jing cut her off with a dark expression. He then gestured for the two of them to follow him as he transformed into a streak of light traveling out of the city. The two Foundation establishment cultivators were still a little shell-shocked, but they could only follow their leader. The two of them had flown over 50 kilometers before they knew it, and they descended on a nondescript little mountain. At an obscure location at the foot of the mountain, there was a small cave abode. Chen Jing led the two into the abode and activated all of the restrictions within before sitting down in the hall to meditate with his eyes closed. The two Foundation establishment cultivators glanced at one another, but neither of them dared to say anything. A long while later, Chen Jing finally opened his eyes and exhaled as his expression eased slightly. "I can confirm now that that man's spiritual sense isn't spying on us here. Even if his spiritual sense can reach this place, it won't be able to bypass the cave's restrictions. What did you want to say, Marshal Yan?" Chen Jing turned to the young woman and asked. "I just wanted to say that this Senior Han's origins are a little suspicious. He's a nascent soul cultivator, yet we've never heard of someone like him. That's really strange. Should we report this matter to our sect so they can investigate this man? Perhaps our patriarch will know who he is." The young woman replied hesitantly. The elderly man nodded in agreement with this proposal. "HMPH, so what if we find out who that man is? Our patriarch is currently in seclusion to make a breakthrough to the late nascent soul stage. No matter who this man is, he's not important enough to disrupt our patriarch's seclusion. If our patriarch can't do anything to him, why would we risk irking him just to find out who he is?" From what he said earlier, it appears that he has some knowledge about the scattered star seas, so he's most likely just come out of an extended period of seclusion. This is certainly not unheard of in our scattered star seas. He warned us not to reveal his location. Do you think he wouldn't dare to do anything to us just because we're from the Azure Yang sect? Even if he kills us without our patriarch to stand up for us, the sect can't do anything to him. Why would we do something that incurs so much risk for no worthwhile reward? Chen Jing harumphed coldly. A chill ran down the young woman's spine upon hearing this, and she hurriedly agreed. "Also, no matter who we reveal this information to, it doesn't benefit us in any way. Instead," Chen Jing was getting slightly carried away and continued in his tirade. However, what he failed to notice was that a faint golden light was shimmering beneath one of his shoes. The golden light flashed before silently departing from the sole of the shoe, then disappearing soundlessly into the stone floor of the hall. Moments later, the golden light reached deep into the ground, where an azure barrier of light abruptly stopped it in its tracks. This was the cave abode's protective restriction. The golden light faltered slightly before receding to reveal a thumb-sized golden beetle. It was one of Han Li's gold-devouring beetles. As soon as the beetle reverted back to its original form, it rushed toward the light barrier and began to take large bites out of it. The restriction wasn't some sort of high-grade restriction. Instead, it was extremely crude, and the beetle was able to pass through it almost instantly, appearing on the other side of the barrier. The restriction wasn't triggered throughout the entire process. Chen Jing's trio was not alerted at all to this sequence of events. The bug flashed before disappearing underground. A short while later, a flash of light suddenly appeared in the eyes of a tall and thin old man who was walking along a certain street in the southern region of the city. A spot of golden light shot forth from the ground before silently disappearing into his sleeve. The old man's expression remained completely unchanged, but the corners of his lips had turned upward ever so slightly. This man was none other than Han Li, who had altered his appearance. That spot of golden light was naturally the gold-devouring beetles, within which he had imbued a sliver of his spiritual sense. After reaching the late nascent soul stage, even though his spiritual sense was still vastly inferior to that of a deity transformation cultivator, it was still far more powerful than that of a late nascent soul cultivator. As such, he was already capable of imbuing a wisp of his spiritual sense into an object. Of course, this wasn't a permanent arrangement. That wisp of spiritual sense could only maintain itself for a certain period of time, and it could only be imbued within a sentient living being. Furthermore, the gold-devouring beetles were spirit insects that were connected to his soul, so he was able to use his spiritual sense to directly control them. When Hanli separated from the three cultivators, he didn't immediately kill them to silence them, but he imbued a wisp of his spiritual sense onto one of his gold-devouring beetles, then snuck it onto Chen Jing's body for him to take back to his cave abode. With Hanli's current power level in conjunction with the gold-devouring beetle's abilities, it naturally wasn't going to be noticed by a mere early core formation cultivator. Hanli had made up his mind. If these three people followed his instructions, then he would naturally leave them alone. However, if they decided to play tricks behind his back, then he would immediately use this gold-devouring beetle to kill all of them. Gold-devouring beetles that were yet to reach full maturity wouldn't be able to do much to nascent soul cultivators, but with their indestructibility and engulfment powers, it would be a very simple task for it to take care of an early core formation cultivator and two foundation establishment cultivators. Following the gold-devouring beetle's return, Hanli immediately withdrew that wisp of spiritual sense. The conversation between Chen Jing's trio was instantly replayed back to him, and he smiled internally before paying no further heed to those three. He turned his attention to the pavilions situated on either side of him. He was clearly in the so-called market already. Not only were there many cultivators here, there were also some high-grade cultivators who rose up into the air or descended from above from time to time. There were also some cautious cultivators who rushed their way through the pavilions on high alert, seemingly constantly in fear of being identified. Hanli was sizing up other cultivators with reckless abandon, and his actions naturally attracted the attention of some cultivators. However, after detecting his cultivation base with their spiritual sense, all of the cultivators were immediately horrified. All of them either rushed away immediately or forced a smile onto their faces before turning away. Hanli had restricted his cultivation base, feigning a late core formation cultivator. Even so, that was already enough to scare off all of the other cultivators. After taking a few more steps, Hanli suddenly faltered as his gaze fell on several pavilions, upon which a hint of surprise appeared on his face. These were 6 two-story pavilions lined up next to one another by the side of the street. There was a long and thin flag set up in front of each of the pavilions, and there were different diagrams on those flags, comprising of a blue monster, a small golden sword, an azure spirit herb, and several other designs. Are those the 6 united palaces? Hanli was surprised to see this. If he recalled correctly, many of the powers in the scattered star seas had already joined the Starfall Coalition. As such, it was very surprising to see another power set up a shop in such a bold manner on this island. It appeared that the Starfall Coalition was indeed quite powerful. Even though they weren't able to dominate the entire Green Spirit Island, the other powers on the island still don't dare to set up shops in the city. Hanli had been in conflict with many of the old nascent soul monsters in the Starfall Coalition, so he naturally wasn't going to seek them out. As such, he shook his head and decided to make his way toward the shop in front of him. However, before he had even begun to approach the shop, several cultivators suddenly emerged from one of the 6 United Palace pavilions. Hanli caught sight of the cultivator at the forefront of the group, upon which his expression changed slightly. This was a yellow-robed old man who appeared to be over 50 years of age. There was a Taoist priest in a set of crane robes beside him. The latter appeared to be around just over 20 years old, and both of them were early nascent soul cultivators. There were 4 core formation cultivators behind them, as well as a middle-aged manager wearing a set of attire from the 6 United Palaces. The manager wore a fawning smile on his face and was clearly trying to curry favor. That was to be expected. After all, nascent soul cultivators were revered beings everywhere, and it was quite an occasion to have 2 of them visit the same shop at once. What made Hanli's expression change slightly was none other than that young Taoist priest in the crane robes. The man appeared to be very young, but no matter how Hanli looked at him, He was clearly the very same Taoist priest who had hunted him down many years ago and almost taken his life, Taoist Master Swift Crane. It was just that he appeared to have reverted back to a far younger age. Despite that, his appearance hadn't changed much. This was the Taoist Master Swift Crane, who had been resurrected from the dead. As for the fact that his appearance had remained largely unchanged, Han Li didn't find that be all that strange. There were countless secret techniques in the cultivation world that could allow one to permanently change their appearance and figure. Most cultivators who were resurrected through possession would unconsciously revert back to their original appearance in order to make everyone forget the fact that they had secured a new body through possession. After all, possession wasn't prohibited among high-grade cultivators, but it was still bad for their reputation. The fact that Taoist Master Swift Crane had reverted back to his original appearance, yet was much younger before, was a clear indication that he had only just used an appearance-altering secret technique not long ago. As such, he hadn't yet had a chance to alter his age as well. After all, appearances could be altered in a short time, but age was a different story. Han Li immediately composed his expression again, before walking toward the pavilions as if nothing had happened. Taoist Master Swift Crane and the yellow-robed man also only took cursory glances at Han Li. They were surprised to see that his cultivation base was quite advanced, but they didn't pay him any heed as they led the four-core formation cultivators toward the center of the city. Han Li also walked on ahead without even turning his head, giving off the impression that he was merely passing by. However, right at this moment, Taoist Master Swift Crane and the yellow-robed man's lips began to move, but they uttered no sounds, thereby indicating that they were conversing using voice transmissions. Han Li had his back to the two of them, and his footsteps faltered slightly again. However, he quickly continued onward, getting further and further away from Taoist Master Swift Crane and the others. After rounding a final corner, Han Li walked into a rather stylish pavilion. 2 hours later, he finally exited the shop, accompanied by a cultivator who appeared to be the manager. However, he didn't immediately depart. Instead, he walked into a nearby shop. When Han Li finally made his way out of the 5th shop, he had exchanged all of the superfluous treasures and materials that he was carrying for over 100 high-grade spirit stones, a result that he was very satisfied with. However, just as he began to walk away, he suddenly discovered that several unfamiliar core formation cultivators had appeared nearby. All of them appeared to be simply casually shopping around, but the peculiar expressions flashing through their eyes suggested a more sinister purpose. Han Li chuckled coldly and immediately decided to stray from his original plan. As such, he began to walk along the street out of the market, then exited the stone city on foot altogether. The cultivators were all using concealment techniques as they pursued Han Li. However, after making it out of the city gates, all of them turned to look at one another. Han Li had been enshrouded under their spiritual sense this entire time, but he had somehow disappeared. Their surroundings were entirely devoid of Han Li's presence. This turn of events naturally had the cultivators scrambling around in a panic. Some of them had been deployed by the shops that Han Li had visited, while others had noticed that Han Li had visited many shops and had been seen off by the managers in a respectful manner on each occasion, thereby alerting them to the fact that major transactions had taken place. Han Li was posing as a late-core formation cultivator, but in the face of a sufficiently tempting reward, these people were not going to back down. Many of them had already decided in advance to join forces. However, following Han Li's mysterious disappearance, these cultivators could search through the surrounding area in a dumbstruck manner. None of them were able to find Han Li in the end, so they could only return to the Stone City with frustration and disappointment in their hearts. Not long after all of them had left, azure light suddenly flashed in the air above the spot that Han Li had just disappeared from. Immediately thereafter, an indistinct humanoid figure began to appear. Spiritual light then flashed from the humanoid figure's body, and it transformed into Han Li with his original set of features. Han Li took a glance at the Stone City, and a deriding sneer appeared on his face. If it weren't for the fact that he didn't want to alert the nascent soul cultivators in the city to his presence, he definitely wouldn't have let those cultivators return to the city alive. As such, they were extremely fortunate to have been unable to see through Han Li's concealment technique. Otherwise, Han Li would have destroyed those core formation cultivators with ease. After looking around from his vantage point up in the air, Han Li decided on a certain direction and flew away as a streak of azure light. A short while later, the streak of azure light descended on a call. This was an extremely tranquil place with beautiful flora and fauna, as well as heavy mountain mist that refused to disperse. Han Li only took a cursory glance around him before nodding to himself. He raised a hand, and a stack of formation flags of different colors appeared. A dozen or so streaks of light shot forth, all of disappearing into the surrounding mist. A layer of white mist then rapidly rose up from the ground, merging with the mist in the call to form what seemed to be a single, inseparable entity. Han Li's body was concealed within this mist. After setting up that concealment formation, he patted a certain spirit beast pouch that was hanging from his waist. A loud buzzing sound erupted as tens of thousands of gold-devouring beetles flew out from the pouch, creating a golden cloud that hovered in front of him. Han Li sat down with his legs folded in front of him and began to chant something. Azure spiritual light began to flash over his body, and a loud boom erupted, following which the beetles transformed into golden flowers that shot forth in all directions. Almost at the exact same moment, Han Li abruptly opened his eyes, which were initially shimmering with a remarkably bright light before then falling extremely dim. This was the secret technique that Han Li had once unleashed in the Devil Fall Valley to split his spiritual sense into over 1,000 strands. It was a technique he had mastered on his own using the Great Development Technique. The technique allowed him to divide his spiritual sense into countless thin strands, which he could then temporarily imbue onto a gold-devouring beetle. Thus, it was the equivalent of suddenly attaining over 1,000 new pairs of ears and eyes. This secret technique appeared to be similar to the technique Han Li had used to imbue the gold-devouring beetle with a wisp of his spiritual sense, but it was actually completely different. One of them involved splitting up his spiritual sense into countless tiny strands at once, then borrowing the senses of the gold-devouring beetles to detect and search for what he was unable to with his spiritual sense. This could only be accomplished by using his soul to directly instruct the beetles, and they couldn't be allowed to stray out of a certain range, as his spiritual sense would be automatically withdrawn in that case. The other technique involved individually imbuing a creature with a fragment of his soul, then allowing the soul fragment to manipulate the living creature in a flexible manner based on a set of instructions received from Han Li in advance. He didn't have to use his soul to control the living creature in the process, and if he wanted to, he could even instruct the spirit insect to attack an enemy. To a certain degree, it was similar to an avatar technique. Furthermore, as long as the time limit wasn't reached, there was no distance restriction on how far the manipulated creature could stray. Unless there was a situation in which he wasn't able to use his spiritual sense for some reason, the former of the two techniques was essentially useless. However, the latter was an extremely useful technique that not even many late nascent soul cultivators could master. As such, the two were simply incomparable. After all of the gold-devouring beetles flew out of the white mist, some of them burrowed into the ground while others rose into the air. In the blink of an eye, all of the spirit insects had disappeared. Han Li sat at the center of the formation with his eyes closed and a cold expression on his face. Time passed by slowly. The sun in the sky gradually descended toward the horizon, and when night finally fell, the entire green spirit island was plunged into darkness. However, the stone city remained brightly lit as a series of moonlight stones that were charged full of spiritual power glowed in the night, making the stone city as bright as if it were still daytime. In contrast, everywhere outside of the stone city appeared to be extremely dark and sea winds howled constantly, as if there were countless demons and devils lurking within the darkness. Cultivators didn't really care whether it was day or night, as they could use their magic power to grant themselves night vision, but the range of their vision would be significantly inferior compared to how far ahead they could during the day. However, that was not the case in the scattered star seas. There were many sea demon beasts in the outer seas, so if one were traveling over the sea or even staying on an island at night, they could still be approached and attacked by demon beasts who were proficient in concealment techniques. After all, cultivators weren't normally on high enough alert to constantly be releasing their spiritual sense. As such, many more cultivators perished as a result of these sneak attacks per year than compared to those who perished during official culls of demon beasts. As such, unless if there were urgent matters to be attended to, or if one felt that they were powerful enough to look after themselves, all of the cultivators on the island would become more alert at night. The locations where cultivators were gathered would have all of their restrictions activated, and all of the cultivators who hadn't traveled out to sea would retreat back into those establishments. Within the stone city that was surrounded by mountains, the 8 stone towers lit up in unison. A blue barrier of light shielded the entire city within in case there were demon beasts who attempted to sneak into the city. However, in the darkness of the night, there were a few people wearing conical bamboo hats who crept silently over to a certain city gate. The guards at the gate consisted of a core formation cultivator, along with several foundation establishment cultivators. The person at the forefront of the group lifted their conical hat slightly to reveal their true features, upon which the guards hurriedly opened up a slit in the city's restrictions to allow them to leave the stone city. As soon as these people left the city, they flew into the darkness as streaks of light, disappearing in the blink of an eye. All of them were traveling quite quickly, and none of them were saying anything. However, when they had reached over 50 kilometers away from the city, one of them suddenly uttered a confused sound as they faltered in the air. A thin white thread shot forth, immediately disappearing into the air behind them. The other cultivators also flattered upon seeing this, and they all turned to look behind them. A sizzling sound erupted, following which a burst of piercing golden light suddenly appeared in the night sky extremely far away. The white thread seemed to have struck something, and following a peculiar screeching noise, the fist-sized ball of golden light began to plummet toward the ground. "What's that?" one of the other cultivators exclaimed. Meanwhile, the cultivator who had unleashed the attack gestured with his hand, upon which the white thread shot back toward him at his behest. The thread spun through the air before transforming into a thin, snowy white needle that fell into his hand. Only then did he reply, "I'm not sure. It seems to be some sort of spirit insect, but I don't know if it's wild or has been tamed. In any case, the spirit insect must have a very hard exoskeleton as it wasn't punctured by my white sorrow needle. Go and recover the body of that insect. I want to see what kind of spirit insect it is." The two cultivators with him immediately responded respectfully, before flying toward the pitch-black ground as two streaks of light, in search of the golden spirit insect that had just been slain. However, the two of them returned with gloomy expressions after 10 minutes. "Sect Master, the spirit insect doesn't appear to have died. We were unable to find its body over there," one of them reported in an uneasy voice. "It didn't die. Do you think my white sorrow needles are sewing needles? You're telling me that it was unable to kill a mere spirit insect?" The cultivator who had unleashed the attack seemed to have been irked by that response. "Brother Bai, that thing really did seem to have survived. I was unable to find it either." The other cultivator suddenly chimed in a grave voice. "Really? Let me have a look." The cultivator who had unleashed the needle was shocked to hear this. He hurriedly released his spiritual sense to carefully search through the surrounding area. A short while later, a strained expression appeared on his face. There really wasn't any sign of that golden spirit insect in the surrounding area. In his astonishment, his lips tremored as he transmitted his voice. The other two cultivators immediately each raised a hand in unison. One of them summoned a small green hammer, while the other unleashed countless thin white threads that shielded all three of them within. "Who's following us? Don't sneak around like a coward. Come out to meet us," the cultivator who had released the white threads yelled. At the same time, his gaze scanned through the surrounding area as an astonishing aura erupted from his body. The surrounding area remained silent, and no one revealed themselves in the darkness. It was as if there really wasn't anyone there. The cultivator who had just spoken was furious upon seeing this. He harumphed coldly as he made a hand seal, preparing to unleash an attack that would force their pursuers to show themselves. Right at this moment, an indistinct buzzing suddenly rang out around them in all directions. Furthermore, the sound was only becoming louder and louder, as if it were rapidly approaching them. The cultivators' hearts jolted upon hearing this, as they surveyed their surroundings with wide eyes. Moments later, spots of golden light began to appear in the darkness. Each and every spot of golden light contained a golden beetle within, and more of those spots were beginning to appear. The group of cultivators had been surrounded. A stir immediately ran through the group upon seeing this. Even the two cultivators at the forefront of the group were astonished. In particular, the one who had just attacked the spirit insect knew just how pesky these spirit insects were. With so many of them appearing at once, it was definitely not going to be easy to take care of all of them. Thus, the cultivator's expression immediately darkened as his spiritual sense swept incessantly through the surrounding area, trying to find that cultivator that was manipulating these spirit insects. However, his search proved to be completely futile. Their opponents had concealed themselves extremely well, leaving him unable to discover their presence. This turn of events immediately made his heart sink. This indicated that their opponents either had special treasures or secret techniques to conceal themselves, or their cultivation base was significantly superior to theirs. In any case, neither of those possibilities were good things. If you're going to use your insects to trap us, then at least give us a reason for your actions. You still haven't revealed yourself to us yet. Are you really just a coward who's going to hide in the shadows? The cultivator who had summoned the jade hammer yelled. At the same time, dazzling green light began to flash from the treasure in his hand. You'll meet me soon enough. Fellow Taoist Swift Crane, I'm here especially for you, so there's no way I wouldn't come out to meet you. Do you remember me? I'm a nondescript cultivator with a Han surname. A cold male voice suddenly rang out from within the darkness. From the sound of the voice, it appeared that the man was still extremely far away. Han, who are you, and when have I ever offended you? One of the masked cultivators stirred upon hearing this. He tore off the conical bamboo hat off his head, revealing a set of youthful features that were filled with shock and bewilderment. This man was none other than Taoist Master Swift Crane. The cultivator who had summoned the white threads also took off his conical hat. He was the yellow-robed cultivator who had accompanied Taoist Master Swift Crane earlier in the day. His expression was quite grim as his gaze flashed through the darkness. As for the cultivators behind them, they were naturally the disciples of these two nascent soul cultivators. It was rather strange that these people were leaving Green Spirit Island in such a sneaky manner during the dead of night. Upon hearing Taoist Master Swift Crane's questions, a burst of raucous laughter erupted from all directions before coming to an abrupt halt. The man clearly had no intention of answering him. This made everyone even more perplexed. Fellow Taoist Swift Crane, is this man one of your enemies? The yellow-robed man asked with furrowed brows. From what their mysterious assailant had said, it appeared that he was directly targeting Taoist Master Swift Crane. I'm not sure. I don't have any recollection of an enemy with the Han surname, Taoist Master Swift Crane replied expressionlessly as he angled the horsetail whisk in his hand before him. Despite his calm expression, he was very confused. He simply couldn't recall having such a powerful enemy. The yellow-robed man seemed to be quite wary of this mysterious cultivator, and he hesitated momentarily before cautioning. Regardless of who this man is, he's clearly coming after you with bad intentions. You should take care, fellow Taoist. I'm naturally aware of that. However, this man is clearly also a nascent soul cultivator. How could I not be able to recall such a powerful enemy? Han, Taoist Master Swift Crane murmured as he fell into deep thought. During this brief delay, the sound of something tearing through the air suddenly erupted in the night sky. A dazzling streak of azure light then shot forth from the distance, appearing amid the horde of beetles following just a few flashes. The light receded to reveal a young man in azure robes. He looked at Taoist Master Swift Crane and chuckled coldly as he said, I was right to have waited for you for so long. So you really were planning to head to Green Spirit Island. Are you going to hand over your spirit stones, or will I have to take them from you? The young man wore a nonchalant expression, completely fearless in the face of Taoist Master Swift Crane and the yellow-robed man, both of whom were early nascent soul cultivators. The two of them swept their spiritual sense toward Han Li, upon which hints of fear appeared on both of their faces. The two of them were unable to detect Han Li's cultivation base. However, from the spiritual pressure that was indistinctly emanating from his body, they could tell that his cultivation base definitely outstripped theirs. This was most likely a mid-nascent soul cultivator. Furthermore, the fact that he had immediately exposed the secret behind their journey came as a huge shock to them. Fellow Taoist, I'm Huang Kun of Fire Dragon Island. I'm afraid I'm not sure what you mean by high-grade spirit stones. Perhaps you were misled by some rumors and harbor some sort of misunderstanding toward us. The yellow-robed man was extremely wily and crafty. He could tell that this enemy was more powerful than them, so he immediately put on a polite smile. Misunderstanding? I heard your voice transmission conversation from earlier. Is that a false rumor? You can only blame your luck for seeking out Swift Crane and running into me. Swift Crane, do you still remember me? A deriding sneer appeared on the young man's face. He then turned his attention to Taoist Master Swift Crane as a frosty look appeared on his face. He was naturally none other than Han Li, who had split his spiritual sense into over 1,000 strands, then employed the assistance of his gold-devouring beetle to track down Taoist Master Swift Crane. The yellow-robed man's smile immediately stiffened upon hearing Han Li's cold words. You're Han Li. You progressed to the nascent soul stage. At the same time as Han Li was replying to the yellow-robed man, Taoist Master Swift Crane was struck by a sense of familiarity. All of a sudden, he recalled back to the events that had transpired all those years ago, and he finally recognized Han Li. Upon making that realization, an incredulous look appeared on his face, as if he had seen a ghost. "Brother Swift Crane, do you know this man? Who is he?" Shock and rage were surging through the yellow-robed man, and he turned to Taoist Master Swift Crane with a dark expression. And Li clearly had no intention of settling this in a peaceful manner, so a battle was inevitable. The yellow-robed man knew that he wouldn't be able to detach himself from the upcoming battle, so it was naturally best to get a gauge of what he was dealing with here. Even though they were facing a mid-nascent soul cultivator, both of them were early nascent soul cultivators, and if they were to join forces, they wouldn't have to fear this opponent. And Li hovered in the air with his arms crossed, looking at the two of them with a cold sneer on his face. "Fellow Taoist Huang, this man is the one who obtained the Heaven Void Cauldron all those years ago. I didn't think that he would have progressed to the nascent soul stage already," Taoist Master Swift Crane replied with a dark expression. "What? He's the man that was being hunted down by the Starfall Alliance. I knew he looked familiar somehow, but wasn't he just a core formation stage brat? How has he reached the mid-nascent soul stage already?" "I'm not sure of that myself. The Heaven Void Cauldron is known as the #1 secret treasure of the scattered star seas, so perhaps it contains some kind of unimaginable pill that can drastically improve one's cultivation base. No one has ever opened the cauldron before, so it's not impossible for that to be the case." Taoist Master Swift Crane speculated with a greedy look in his eyes. "If that really is the case, then we're in deep trouble. His cultivation base is already this fearsome, and he has the Heaven Void Cauldron. Even if we combine our powers, we may not be able to defeat him." The yellow-robed man transmitted his voice to Taoist Master Swift Crane as he looked at Han Li with a wary expression. "I'm naturally aware of that, but even if that turns out to be the case, how will he be able to stop us if we run away?" Taoist Master Swift Crane's lips twitched slightly, but a confident look appeared on his face. As for those core formation stage disciples, in such a perilous situation, they would simply have to be left behind. "You're right," the yellow-robed cultivator faltered upon hearing this before bursting into laughter. "HMPH, are you done talking? If you're done, then it's time I sent you two on your way. Don't even think about trying to escape." Han Li stirred as he chuckled coldly. "Crap, we forgot that he can eavesdrop on our voice transmissions." The yellow-robed man's expression changed upon realizing this. Taoist Master Swift Crane's expression also faltered upon hearing this. Right at this moment, a thunderclap erupted from behind Han Li as his thunderstorm wings appeared on his back. His body then swayed, and he disappeared amid another loud thunderclap. "Look out! He possesses a strange treasure that allows him to unleash lightning movement techniques." Taoist Master Swift Crane had seen Han Li use his thunderstorm wings in the past, and he immediately offered words of caution to the yellow-robed man. Spiritual light flashed on the green jade hammer, and it transformed into a barrier of azure light that shielded him within. At the same time, he feigned a grabbing motion with his other hand to summon a fiery red shield. The shield also transformed into a red barrier of light that surrounded his body. Letter 1D453, letter 1D633, letter 1D452, letter 1D452, letter 1D4CC, letter 1D626, letter 1D624, letter 1D45C, letter 1D45A. Meanwhile, the yellow-robed man made a hand seal. The white threads nearby instantly flashed through the air, interweaving with one another to form a dense net that encompassed his own body. After the two of them had unleashed their defensive techniques, silver light flashed over 100 feet in front of them as Han Li reappeared. Upon seeing the defensive measures they had taken, Han Li merely sneered and didn't even bother to summon any treasures. He raised both arms and a layer of purple flame surfaced over his body. His body then swayed as he transformed into a massive fireball, hurtling directly toward the yellow-robed man. The elderly man's heart shuddered at the sight of Han Li's ferocious attack, but he didn't have any time to think as he let loose a low roar. The white threads in front of him immediately changed directions, flying toward the fireball in unison, as if he were trying to puncture countless holes into Han Li's body. A vicious light also appeared in Taoist Master Swift Crane's eyes as he pointed to the jade hammer in front of him, upon which light shot forth from the treasure in all directions. The green light that erupted from the hammer emitted loud rumbling booms before crashing toward Han Li. In the face of their attacks, Han Li took no evasive measures whatsoever. He plunged straight into the dense expanse of threads, and the deriding sneer on his face was obscured by his purple flames. A peculiar turn of events unfolded. As soon as the white threads came into contact with the purple flame, they came to an abrupt halt as if they had been dealt a heavy blow, revealing them to be a series of needles that were as thin as hair. Han Li swept an arm through the air, and the purple flames over his body expanded by over a foot, instantly engulfing the thin needles within. Purple light flashed over the needles, instantly sealing them in layers of purple ice, upon which the needles all began to plummet as they had lost their spiritual nature. As for the oncoming green jade hammer, Han Li nonchalantly waved a sleeve through the air, and a purple light flashed past, sending the hammer flying as if it had been struck by an immense force. Taoist Master Swift Crane hurriedly made a hand seal to try and arrest its momentum, but all to no avail. Light began to shimmer along the surface of the hammer as well before it was also sealed in a block of purple ice in the blink of an eye. The Taoist priest's expression had become extremely strained. The yellow-robed man was also struggling to believe his own eyes. Never would he have thought that the treasures he relied so heavily upon would be nullified so easily. This was simply incredible to him. At the sight of the oncoming Han Li, he hurriedly sent a silver wheel flying out from within his sleeve. However, Han Li was moving as fast as the wind, and he reached the yellow-robed man in a flash as his purple flames tumbled through the air. The silver wheel had only flashed twice before a golden light appeared, upon which the wheel was soundlessly sliced in half and plummeted toward the ground. The yellow-robed man's pupils contracted drastically upon seeing this. There was yellow light flashing in his mouth, and he was just about to summon his magic treasure. However, during this split-second delay, an eerie smile appeared on Han Li's face as one of his arms suddenly turned blurry before disappearing in a flash. Almost at the exact same moment, the yellow-robed man felt something tighten around his neck as a frosty hand rested itself around his throat. A purple light then flashed in front of his eyes, and his spiritual sense lost connection with the magic treasure that he was about to release. Arg! The yellow-robed man was absolutely petrified. He only had time to let loose a howl of anguish before purple ice began to spread from his neck, encompassing his entire body and rendering him completely immobilized. His face was immortalized in an expression of the utmost horror in the block of ice. Han Li chuckled coldly as he carried the humanoid ice sculpture in one hand. He turned and swept his expressionless gaze across all of the other cultivators. Four-core formation cultivators knew that they wouldn't be able to intervene in a battle between nascent soul cultivators, and even though they had all summoned their treasures, they could only look on from afar with fear surging through their hearts. At the sight of the yellow-robed man being subdued by Han Li, they all glanced at one another before yelling in unison as they dispersed, transforming into streaks of light as they fled for their lives. As for Han Li's main target, Taoist Master Swift Crane, he had fled the scene even before the four-core formation cultivators. In the instant that the yellow-robed man was captured by Han Li, Taoist Master Swift Crane was extremely shocked to discover that Han Li was far more powerful than he had imagined. He knew that he had zero chance of securing victory, so he immediately made a snap decision and hurtled toward the stone city as a green streak of light. He was initially quite concerned that the golden beetles in the air would converge to try and stop him. However, to his surprise, the spirit insects were all rooted to the spot, as if they were puppets, allowing him to escape without any impediment. Taoist Master Swift Crane was overjoyed to see this, and after flashing through the air a few times, he had already covered a distance of over 1,000 feet. Han Li didn't waste any time upon seeing this. He swept his long sleeve toward the core formation cultivators first, upon which 4 streaks of golden light shot forth, traveling so quickly that they were able to catch up to the 4 cultivators almost instantaneously. A series of agonized cries rang out in quick succession. The cultivators' protective treasures were all punctured by the golden light, sending blood raining down from above along with their mutilated bodies and ruined treasures. Only then did Han Li turn his attention to Taoist Master Swift Crane, who had almost disappeared from view. He chuckled coldly upon seeing this and didn't give chase. Instead, a loud thunderclap erupted from the hand that was carrying the ice sculpture, summoning several bolts of thick golden lightning, instantly transforming into a golden net that ensnared the ice sculpture within. Lightning flashed violently, and the ice sculpture was pulverized by the golden light. At the same time, a yellow nascent soul that was about an inch in height appeared. The features on the nascent soul were completely identical to that of the yellow-robed man. The nascent soul wore an expression of sheer panic as it quickly made a hand seal. Spiritual light flashed over its body, and it disappeared on the spot. However, in the next instant, a loud boom erupted from a certain spot on the golden net, and the nascent soul was forced to reveal itself. Teleportation techniques were completely useless in the face of restrictions created by the divine devil-bane lightning. And Li didn't say anything as he feigned a grabbing motion. The golden knight abruptly contracted, forming a golden ball of light that ensnared the nascent soul within. He then raised a hand, and several talismans flew through the air, plastering themselves to the nascent soul's body. The nascent soul's spiritual power congealed as a result, and it was immediately completely immobilized. Li clasped his hands behind his back and turned his attention away from the nascent soul. Instead, he narrowed his eyes and directed his gaze toward the direction that Taoist Master Swift Crane had disappeared in. At this point, Taoist Master Swift Crane was already several thousand feet away. Magic power was flowing within his body without any reservation, and he was traveling almost as fast as lightning. Even so, he still turned to look behind him from time to time, seemingly in constant fear that Li would be able to chase him down. After seeing only a vast expanse of inky darkness behind him, Taoist Master Swift Crane finally heaved an internal sigh of relief. However, he didn't slow down in the slightest. Instead, he flipped a hand over to summon an azure talisman before making a hand seal, appearing as if he were preparing to activate the talisman. Unbeknownst to Taoist Master Swift Crane, in the instant that he had turned to face forward once again, a faint silver light appeared behind him, following which an azure humanoid figure emerged in a wraith-like manner. The humanoid figure appeared to be flying at a leisurely pace, but it wasn't being outsped in the slightest. This was naturally the humanoid puppet that Li had already released in advance. However, the Taoist priest was completely oblivious to this, as his attention was focused on the talisman in his hand. The puppet raised a hand, and a silver fist flew soundlessly through the air. The protective barrier around the Taoist priest's body formed by that red shield was instantly punctured by the silver fist, as if it were a mere papier-mâché construction. The fist then struck him on the back, and the protective layer of spiritual light over his body was also instantly pulverized. Taoist Master Swift Crane's heart sank at the realization that he was being attacked from behind, but it was already too late for him to react. The fist suddenly protruded out from the front of the Taoist priest's chest, leaving a gruesome crimson trail in its wake. The fist was then violently withdrawn, creating a puncture wound with a diameter comparable to that of a bowl on Taoist Master Swift Crane's chest. A blood-curdling howl erupted as Taoist Master Swift Crane's body plummeted powerlessly toward the ground. The humanoid puppet rubbed its hands together before waving them downward, upon which a silver net of light descended from above. 10 minutes later, Li had already settled onto the nearby mountain peak when he saw a silver streak of light appear in the distance. The streak of light was flying directly toward him, and a faint smile appeared on his face. A loud thump erupted as Taoist Master Swift Crane was hurled down from above, landing heavily at Li's feet. He had already been encapsulated in a layer of silver light, and there were talismans of all different colors plastered onto his body. A humanoid figure flashed, and the puppet appeared behind Li. Only then did Li turn his attention to Taoist Master Swift Crane. The latter's body was splattered with blood, and he was already half dead. A hint of a smile appeared on Li's face. 4 hours later, a streak of azure light silently flew out from Lightning Sky Island, disappearing into the distance in the blink of an eye. The azure streak of light was none other than Li, and he was holding 2 green storage pouches in his hands with a contemplative look on his face. The pouches were storage pouch that he had obtained from Taoist Master Swift Crane and the yellow-robed man. There were over 100 high-grade spirit stones in each pouch, and they were going to sneak them back to Green Spirit Island. It turned out that Taoist Master Swift Crane appeared to have allied himself with the other powers on the island, but he had actually pledged his allegiance to the Starfall Coalition in secret. He was planning to control the islands near Green Spirit Island with the Starfall Coalition's support, and this Lightning Sky Island was one of his targets. High-grade spirit stones being sold on Lightning Sky Island by the sect that Taoist Master Swift Crane belonged to were given to him in secret by Starfall Coalition cultivators. The cultivators from the Starfall Coalition had excavated those spirit stones from Green Spirit Island and was doing this to support Taoist Master Swift Crane, so he could increase his influence on Lightning Sky Island. The yellow-robed man was a nascent soul itinerant cultivator who had been bribed by the Starfall Coalition. He was responsible for taking over another island, and his position was similar to that of Taoist Master Swift Crane. This man had appeared at Lightning Sky Island as he had received an incredible order, just as Taoist Master Swift Crane had. They were ordered to gather all of the high-grade spirit stones they had, then transport them over to Green Spirit Island as quickly as possible. It appeared that there was an extremely important matter that required these high-grade spirit stones as well as the power of these nascent soul cultivators. They had also been told to do their best to keep all of the cultivators from the other powers in the dark about this, due to the facts that this order was very strange, and the island that the yellow-robed man was staying on was very close to Lightning Sky Island. The two of them decided to meet up before traveling to Green Spirit Island together, thinking that they would have more strength in numbers. However, unbeknownst to them, their conversation at the market about buying back spirit stones was overheard by Han Li. He didn't manage to hear the entire conversation, but from what he did hear, he deduced that the two of them had pledged their allegiance to the Starfall Coalition. They were both carrying a large number of spirit stones, and they were going to depart from the Stone City soon. Han Li had a score to settle with Taoist Master Swift Crane anyway, so he naturally wasn't going to hold back, especially after learning the fact that these two were both carrying large amounts of high-grade spirit stones, and taking into the account the fact that he had once been hunted down for a long time by the nascent soul cultivators of the Starfall Coalition. Thus, he immediately left the Stone City and split his spiritual sense into countless threads, then releasing over 10,000 gold-devouring beetles all over the Stone City to maintain surveillance over Taoist Master Swift Crane. As a result, he was able to stop their group just as they were about to leave the island. With his current power as a late nascent soul cultivator, he was naturally able to take down two early nascent soul cultivators with ease. Up to this point, he had achieved his objective for this journey and could immediately return to the inner star seas. However, when he was using his soul search technique on the two cultivators, he gleaned an important piece of information. It turned out that Zenith Yin, the man who had once almost taken his life, had also arrived in the nearby area. Furthermore, he was one of the mine-guarding elders deployed to Green Spirit Island by the Starfall Coalition. Zenith Yin was definitely one of the enemies that Han Li detested the most in the scattered star seas. Back when he was in the Heaven Void Hall, if it weren't for his own resourcefulness and a copious amount of luck, he would have most likely been tortured to death by this old devil already. As such, Zenith Yin was one of the main targets on Han Li's hit list. After learning the fact that this devil was currently on the nearby Green Spirit Island, Han Li naturally wasn't going to pass up this opportunity to exact his revenge. Through his soul search technique, he had discovered that there were 4 Starfall Coalition nascent soul cultivators on Green Spirit Island, one of which was at the mid-nascent soul stage, while the other 3 were all early nascent soul cultivators. Letter 1D65B, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D486, letter 1D4E, letter 1D498, letter 1D65A. Letter 1D4EC, letter 1D490, letter 1D662. This was a formidable force that was perhaps enough to intimidate the other 2 powers on the island, but it was nothing in the eyes of the current Han Li. He had absolute confidence in his ability to sneak onto the island, then kill Zenith Yin and depart without alerting anyone else. With that in mind, Han Li naturally wasn't going to delay any longer. He immediately set forth for Green Spirit Island. 3 days later, Han Li finally arrived in the region of the sea close to Green Spirit Island. Lightning Sky Island was already quite a large island, but it was simply incomparable to the massive scale of Green Spirit Island. Han Li hovered in the air several tens of kilometers away from Green Spirit Island, surveying the island from afar. He felt as if this island wasn't much smaller than Heavenly Star City. Letter 1D667, letter 1D65A, letter 1D65A, letter 1D500, letter 1D486, letter 1D4EB. Letter 1D484, letter 1D664, letter 1D4F6. Of course, the island didn't have as many buildings, nor huge mountains like the Sacred Mountain. However, there were several mountains that were close to 100,000 feet in height, and they were extremely rare in their own right. What was most astonishing was that the mountains were all extremely steep and barren. From afar, not even a single blade of grass could be seen growing on the mountains, making them appear as if they were stone pillars extending all the way up into the heavens. The peaks of the mountains down to around their halfway points were all obscured from view by the clouds. However, none of those details caught Han Li's attention. What he was more concerned about was the fact that there wasn't even a single tinge of green to be seen on the entire island. The whole island had a drab grayish-white undertone, and he couldn't sense any spiritual chi fluctuations coming from the island either. This island was like a desolate land without any spirit veins. Han Li was rather perplexed upon making this observation. Wasn't it said that this island had massive spirit stone mines? How could it not even have a single spirit vein? Generally speaking, spirit mines were products of spirit veins. Where spirit veins existed, spirit stone mines of different grades would inevitably slowly emerge. Conversely speaking, places where spirit stone mines were found generally had spirit veins as well. In Han Li's imagination, an island on which high-grade spirit stone mines could be formed had to be sitting on top-quality spirit veins that were extremely rare in the human world. However, the scenes currently laid out before his eyes had him at a loss for words. After contemplating the situation, Han Li realized that he had been too naive. If there were top-quality spirit veins that were easy to discover on a massive island like this, how could the so-called high-grade spirit stone mines only have been unearthed recently? They would have been mined by ancient cultivators until there was nothing left. It appeared that there was something on this island that could conceal the fluctuations of spirit veins. With that in mind, Han Li was immediately enlightened. He raised his head to look up at the scorching sun. It was noon at this point, and even though Han Li was confident in his abilities, it was naturally still more convenient to act at night. Thus, he circled over the surrounding area for a while before discovering a rock that was exposed above the surface of the ocean, upon which he landed upon it. He then sat down on the rock with his legs folded in front of him and began to meditate. Several hours later, night fell once again, and Han Li abruptly opened his eyes. He flew toward the island as a streak of azure light, unleashing a secret technique as he did so to make light more blurry and indistinct. In the darkness of the night, normal cultivators would definitely be unable to detect his presence. After a while, Han Li reached the massive island. Due to the fact that he had used the soul search technique on Taoist master Swift Crane and the yellow-robed man, Han Li was able to easily identify the area that had been occupied by the Starfall Coalition cultivators. Thus, he immediately snuck onto the island and flew toward a massive mountain. Along the way, Han Li encountered many concealment restrictions. After unleashing his spiritual sense, he discovered that there were many guards concealed nearby, and the closer he got to the mountain, the more guards he discovered. However, at his current power level, these restrictions and low-grade cultivators were naturally nothing to him. He snuck past them without any impediment, and none of the guards were alerted to his approach. An indistinct streak of light flew directly toward the center of the Starfall Coalition area, finally reaching the foot of the massive mountain. The azure light receded, and Han Li's figure emerged. He wasn't in a hurry to continue onward. Instead, he looked up toward the mountain peak and contemplated momentarily before a blue light suddenly flashed through his eyes. A faint blue barrier of light was suddenly revealed to Han Li as a result. The light barrier encompassed the entire mountain peak, and its surface was as smooth as flowing water. This was a powerful restriction created by some sort of rare formation spell. Han Li's brows furrowed upon seeing this. Such a massive formation restriction couldn't be broken just by using some sort of secret technique. Of course, this didn't mean that the restriction was actually going to be able to stop Han Li. The blue light in his eyes faded and he flipped his hand over, upon which a ball of three-colored flames emerged. It was none other than his trifling fan. Doing this could alert the nearby guards, but Han Li had no choice. In the worst-case scenario, he would just have to kill the guards. As long as he didn't waste any time, it wouldn't be difficult for him to find Zenith Yin, and after killing him, no one on the island would be able to stop him from escaping. With that in mind, Han Li raised his feather fan and prepared to blast his way into the restriction. However, right at this moment, his expression suddenly changed, and the spiritual light on his triflame fan was snuffed out as a surprised look appeared on his face. He then immediately stowed the fan away into his sleeve and disappeared on the spot. Almost at the exact same moment, light flashed in the distance as several streaks of light came rushing toward the mountain with reckless abandon, making no attempt to conceal themselves. A short while later, the streaks of light reached the foot of the mountain, and as the light receded, 3 people were revealed. The one at the forefront of the group was a cultivator with disheveled white hair. He had a set of remarkably youthful features, yet his cultivation base was at the mid-nascent soul stage. The 2 people behind him were rather similar in appearance to the white-haired man, but their faces were completely pale and devoid of blood. Neither of them had any expressions on their faces, and their white robes presented a slightly eerie sight in the darkness of the night. The white-haired cultivator seemed to be very familiar with the restriction around the mountain peak. He stopped directly in front of the blue barrier of light before raising a hand, upon which a fiery red voice transmission talisman shot forth into the light barrier. A short while later, light suddenly flashed from the blue barrier, and a loud rumbling erupted as an opening slowly appeared. The three cultivators flew in through the opening one after the other, following which the light barrier rapidly sealed over again. No one noticed that there was a faint azure figure that had flown in with them behind the last white-robed man in their group. Even the white-haired cultivator didn't notice that anything was amiss. Within the blue barrier of light, several cultivators stood in front of the white-haired cultivator with respectful expressions on their faces. "Greetings, Senior Fei. Elder Tang currently has some important matters to attend to, so please rest for a night in the guest pavilion first, and tomorrow, Elder Tang will meet you at the Cloudsmoke Hall." The man who had spoken was a burly core formation cultivator who appeared to be around just over 30 years of age and was wearing an extremely respectful expression on his face. "What do you mean by that? He told me that there was urgent business to be taken care of and asked me to get to the island as soon as possible, but he's now telling me to meet him tomorrow. Is Elder Tang intentionally trying to play games with me?" The white-haired cultivator's expression immediately darkened with displeasure. The burly man's face immediately paled as he hurriedly explained, "That's definitely not the case. Elder Tang really is busy attending to important matters. There's no way he would show any disrespect toward you, Senior Fei." The white-haired cultivator harumphed coldly before abruptly changing the topic. "Forget it. I'll ask him about this in person tomorrow. How many fellow Taoists have arrived on the island so far? Tomorrow is the final deadline for arrival, right?" The burly man was clearly very relieved by this change of subject, and he truthfully replied, "Aside from Senior Swift Crane of Lightning Sky Island and Senior Huang Mo of Heavenly Light Island, all of the other seniors are here. Ever since that Swift Crane had his body destroyed, he's become as cowardly as a rat. He'll surely come with Huang Kun, so it's no surprise that he's late." A disdainful look appeared on the white-haired cultivator's face. The burly man could only pretend that he hadn't heard that. He didn't dare to voice his opinions on nascent soul cultivators. White-haired man chuckled coldly upon seeing this before issuing an instruction to one of the white-robed men behind him. Crimson light flashed through the man's eyes as his body twisted at an incredible angle. His upper body elongated like a python to several times its original length, and he immediately pounced on a defenseless Foundation Establishment cultivator. He plunged his fangs into the Foundation Establishment cultivator's neck and began to gulp down large mouthfuls of blood essence. "Arg!" The Foundation Establishment cultivators standing nearby hurriedly stumbled back in horror. A few of them had even brought out their protective treasures to defend themselves. "Quit kicking up a fuss. It's just feeding time for my devilish corpses." The white-haired man glared at the low-grade cultivators. The guards could only put away their treasures. Only then did the white-haired man's expression ease slightly as he patted a storage pouch hanging from his waist. A thumb-sized pill that was filled with blood energy shot forth from the storage pouch, upon which the man pointed a finger at the pill, sending it flying toward the other white-robed man. The man opened his mouth expressionlessly and swallowed the pill before continuing to stand still on the spot. Meanwhile, the other white-robed man was still sucking the guard's blood essence with reckless abandon. The guard was originally 7 feet tall, but following a series of crackles and pops that rang out from his joints, his body began to shrink rapidly. At the same time, his skin became extremely shriveled and dry, taking on the appearance of old tree bark. The white-haired cultivator looked on with a cold expression and had no intention of rescuing the guard. After the victim had been reduced to a height of around half a foot, he finally made a hand seal and cast a crimson incantation seal onto the white-robed man's back. The white-robed man's body immediately shuddered, and he reluctantly released his victim before its body reverted back to his original state. Crimson light shot forth from the white-haired man's hand, striking the guard that had been reduced to an unrecognizable miniature version of himself. A spluttering sound erupted as a ball of crimson flames engulfed the Foundation Establishment cultivator's body, reducing him to nothingness in the blink of an eye, completely eradicating even his soul in the process. "Take me to the guest pavilion," the white-haired man instructed as if nothing had happened. "Yes, please follow me, Senior." The core formation cultivator hurriedly forced a smile onto his face and did as he was told. He rose into the air as a streak of light and led the trio up toward the mountain peak, disappearing into the cloud and missed up above in the blink of an eye. The other Foundation Establishment cultivators all heaved a collective sigh of relief with fear lingering on their faces. Unbeknownst to all of them, a concealed humanoid figure had witnessed everything that had just unfolded from a vantage point in the air over 1,000 feet above them. Sinister Yin blood corpse. I didn't think there would be someone in the human world that would dare to refine such devilish corpses. Isn't he afraid that the sinister Yin Qi will enter his body and kill him? The man who was muttering to himself was naturally none other than Han Li, who had snuck surreptitiously into the restriction. He had his arms crossed as he hovered in midair, murmuring to himself in an inaudible voice, seemingly having identified the nature of the white-haired cultivator's devilish corpses. Sinister Yin blood corpses were a type of devilish corpse recorded in the corpse refinement tome that Han Li had obtained from old devil Qian. There was no actual refinement method recorded, but it did mention that this blood corpse was extremely powerful, yet the refinement process was very vicious. It was said that in order to refine this devilish corpse, one had to use a body with the same bloodline as their own. Only then would they be able to use the power of their bloodline to repress the backlash from the blood corpse. During the refinement process, the soul of the body being used would be trapped in the body for eternity without being able to pass on to the afterlife. Cultivators didn't hold blood ties in as high a regard as mortals, but there were still very few cultivators who could do something so heinous and obscene. It was rather peculiar now that Han Li thought about it. Even if there were some extremely cruel cultivators who managed to refine such blood corpses, all of them suffered extremely gruesome fates, with none of them living out the entirety of their natural lifespan. As such, there were many evil cultivators who yearned for these powerful blood corpses, but there weren't that many who dared to actually refine them. At this point, there were almost no cultivators who knew the method to refine these blood corpses. Even a great cultivator like old devil Qian, who had refined the unbroken sync devils, was unaware of that specific refinement method. As such, Han Li was naturally very surprised upon identifying the two sinister yin blood corpses accompanying the white-haired cultivator. However, regardless of who this white-haired cultivator was or what heinous things he had done in the past, as long as he didn't get in Han Li's way, Han Li couldn't be bothered to pay him any heed. After hovering in the air for a while, Han Li's body swayed as he flew directly toward the mountain peak. He had used the soul search technique on Taoist Master Swift Crane and the yellow-robed man, but they didn't know the specific location of Zenith Yin's residence, either. All they knew was that he lived on this mountain peak, so Han Li would have to do a bit of searching himself. He easily subdued a Foundation establishment guard on the mountain and secured the information he was looking for after using his soul search technique again. From that guard's memories, he learned that Zenith Yin hadn't gone anywhere and was currently situated in his residence. Han Li was ecstatic upon making this discovery. He reduced the guard to a cloud of dust before heading directly toward the mountain peak. The pinnacle of the mountain was quite vast and spacious, but there weren't many buildings there. Aside from a few sporadic halls and pavilions, there were only large stretches of empty land. That was only to be expected. There were many high-grade cultivators on the island, but almost no low-grade cultivators below the Foundation establishment stage. As such, there was only a total of around 500 to 600 Starfall Coalition cultivators on the island. Such a large number of cultivators at or above the Foundation establishment stage was already quite a force to be reckoned with, and that wasn't even taking into account the fact that there were also several nascent soul cultivators on the island. Han Li concealed himself and continued soundlessly toward a certain massive pavilion. This pavilion was quite a spectacular building with 5 levels, which tapered upward to form a pyramid, and the first level took up an area of several thousand feet. However, the entire building was constructed from a strange type of pitch-black rocks which exuded dark yin qi, striking one with a very dark and gloomy feeling. Han Li took a glance at the building before him, which had almost been entirely enshrouded in dark yin qi, and a cold smile appeared on his face as he swept a hand through the air. A massive blade of purple flames hurtled through the air, slicing open a path in the tumbling yin qi. Han Li transformed into a streak of azure light and shot forth into that makeshift passageway without any hesitation. "Who's there?" As soon as Han Li entered through the doors of the pavilion, an alarmed voice sounded, and a streak of black light came flying toward him. The light seemed to contain a middle-aged cultivator. This man wasn't Zenith Yin, so Han Li completely ignored him and swept a sleeve toward him, summoning a sword that was over 10 feet in length which suddenly disappeared as it flashed through the air. The middle-aged cultivator's heart jolted with shock upon seeing this, and he opened his mouth to try and expel some sort of magic treasure. However, it was already too late. Golden light flashed through the air, and the sword reappeared above his head before shooting downward like a bolt of lightning. A howl of anguish rang out as the cultivator body was instantly sliced into several pieces. Even his soul had been pulverized by the golden light, and not even a single shred of it was able to escape. Hanli glanced expressionlessly at the mutilated body. This was clearly a core formation cultivator, and judging from the cultivation art that he had unleashed, he appeared to be one of Zenith Yin's disciples. He flicked a finger and a crimson fireball shot forth. Scorching heat waves radiated through the air as the sections of the body were burned into nothingness. Hanli turned toward the staircase, and a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. It was rather strange that Zenith Yin still hadn't been alerted to the fact that something was amiss at this point. He immediately unleashed his spiritual sense and sent it sweeping up into the higher levels of the pavilions. A short while later, a peculiar look appeared on his face. He discovered that the higher levels of the pavilion were completely empty, with not a single person to be found. It was as if that core formation cultivator had been the only one guarding this entire pavilion. Could it be that Zenith Yin had already left the pavilion and wasn't staying in his residence? Hanli was feeling slightly disappointed. He stroked his chin, and a contemplative look appeared on his face. All of a sudden, a thought seemed to have occurred to him as he sent his spiritual sense sweeping into the ground below. Immediately thereafter, a smile appeared on his face. He immediately patted the storage pouch hanging from his waist to summon 2 red and yellow jade scepters. He gently waved the scepters through the air, upon which a yellow barrier of light appeared, encompassing his body within. He then twisted his body and somehow burrowed into the ground. The first level of the pavilion was immediately empty again. After traveling over 100 feet underground, a gray barrier of light and a pitch-black stone wall appeared before Hanli. Hanli immediately summoned a layer of purple flames over his hand before swiping it toward the light barrier. A small gash was immediately torn into the gray barrier of light. Hanli twisted his body and transformed into an azure thread, thus allowing him to insert himself through the gash that was only around half a foot wide. When he set foot on a pristine stone step, he discovered that he was situated on a stone staircase that was leading downward with smooth black rocks in all directions around him. Hanli looked downward with a cold expression before narrowing his eyes as he released his spiritual sense. He was going to assess the situation down below first before deciding on a course of action. However, he then immediately raised an eyebrow as he uttered a sound of surprise. After traveling downward for several hundred feet, his spiritual sense was rebounded by an invisible force. Someone had set up a spiritual sense-repelling restriction at the bottom of the passageway. Hanli was a little surprised, and also quite curious upon making this discovery. Not only were spiritual sense formations extremely complex, they were also very expensive to set up. Even a nascent soul cultivator wouldn't erect one for no good reason. This place should only have been a temporary abode for Zenith Yin, so why would he set up a restriction of this caliber? That was very strange. With a hint of surprise in his heart, Hanli immediately went drifting downward. The length of this stone staircase far exceeded Hanli's expectations. After making his way all the way downward for several thousand feet, he still hadn't reached the bottom, and it was as if he were descended into a bottomless pit. Hanli's brows furrowed as a sense of confusion welled up in his heart. After drifting down for a while longer, a powerful burst of spiritual chi suddenly came rushing toward him. His heart jolted with shock in response, and his footsteps reflexively came to an abrupt halt. This was indeed spiritual chi of the utmost purity, far superior to the caliber of spiritual chi found in normal top-grade spirit veins. Hanli took a deep breath, and his expression changed slightly as he backtracked for over 100 feet. Letter 1D6A letter 1D563 letter 1D556 letter 1D680 letter 1D6A0 letter 1D6AT letter 1D554 letter 1D428 letter 1D55E. Once he scaled back up a few steps, the spiritual chi suddenly ceased to exist. There really is something interesting going on here, Hanli mused to himself as he reverted back to his normal expression. He then surveyed his surroundings and suddenly raised a hand without any premonition, grabbing viciously toward the stone wall beside him. Glacial light shimmered on his fingertips, and the black stone gave away like tofu, allowing his fingers to sink into the stone before gouging out a large chunk. Behind the black stone wall was a type of faint azure stone. Han Li withdrew his hand and looked down at the large chunk of azure stone in his hand. The stone didn't appear to be any different compared to normal azure stone. Han Li raised an eyebrow as his 5 fingers converged. The chunk of stone was immediately crushed into a fine powder before spilling down onto the stone steps. Almost at the exact same moment, blue light flashed in Han Li's eyes as he unleashed his bright-sight spirit eyes. What's this? He had finally noticed something peculiar. Within the powdered azure stone, there was a faint silver granule that was flashing incessantly. Of course, this type of flashing was only perceivable to Han Li after he had injected his spiritual power into his eyes. He was unable to identify what kind of strange material this silver granule was, but Han Li knew that this substance was most likely what had sealed the spiritual qi deep within this mountain. That also explained why the spirit stone mines on this island had never been discovered by ancient cultivators or the demon beasts in the sea. After ascertaining the reason for this, Han Li didn't delay any longer as he drifted down the stone steps again. Seeing as spiritual qi of such a high level of purity had already appeared, Han Li estimated that he couldn't be far away from Zenith Yin. As expected, after traveling downward for about 500 to 600 more feet, a ray of white light appeared around a corner up ahead. Furthermore, the sound of a conversation could be indistinctly heard. Could it be that Zenith Yin wasn't alone? Han Li's eyes narrowed as a peculiar feeling welled up in his heart. However, at his current power level, even if the people that Zenith Yin was conversing with were the legendary archsaint of the 6 paths and Wan Sangu, he would still have nothing to fear. Thus, he immediately rushed forward and rounded the corner in a flash. After doing so, he appeared at the entrance to a stone chamber. The stone door of the chamber was left ajar, and faint white light was emanating from within. Han Li chuckled coldly as he flicked a finger toward the stone door. 2 thick bolts of golden lightning shot forth, soundlessly dividing the stone door into 4 portions. Han Li's body then swayed as he appeared directly within the stone chamber. At the same time, he turned his gaze toward a certain corner of the stone chamber. There was a black-robed cultivator with long and narrow eyes standing in that corner. He had his hands clasped behind his back, and he was staring at Han Li with his mouth gaped wide open and an astonished look on his face. This man was none other than Zenith Yin. A ball of black yin flames was hovering over the stone table in front of Zenith Yin, within which was a faint golden nascent soul. Zenith Yin was using his yin flames to torture the nascent soul, and there was no one else in the stone chamber. Han Li? After a brief moment of stunned inactivity, Zenith Yin immediately identified Han Li, upon which an ecstatic expression appeared on his face. He had been yearning for the heaven-void cauldron for a long time. Thus, Zenith Yin immediately swept a sleeve through the air, sending a burst of black devilish qi surging forth violently. The devilish qi transformed into a pitch-black giant python before pouncing toward Han Li. Han Li chuckled coldly upon seeing this as he raised a single hand. A thunderclap erupted from his arm as a thick arc of dazzling, golden lightning appeared. He spread open his fingers, and a golden lightning worm shot forth from his arm, clashing directly with the oncoming black python. Divine Devilbane Lightning. Zenith Yin's heart jolted with shock upon seeing this. He immediately tried to make another hand seal, but it was already too late. The golden worm threw itself at the black python, creating a resounding boom. Golden light flashed, and the black python's body was enshrouded by countless arcs of golden lightning, before being reduced to nothingness in the blink of an eye. The divine Devilbane Lightning's efficacy against devilish qi was no joke. A hint of rage appeared on Zenith Yin's face as he patted the storage pouch hanging from his waist. A loud cry erupted as a streak of crimson light around a foot in length shot forth from the storage pouch. It flashed through the air before arriving directly above Han Li's head, where it transformed into a long crimson saber and came crashing downward. Before the saber had even begun its descent, the pungent odor of blood and gore came rushing toward Han Li first. Han Li's expression darkened as he tilted his head back and abruptly opened his mouth, sending a small golden sword flying upward. A loud clang rang out as golden and crimson light became interwoven with one another. The crimson saber then let loose a cry of anguish before being sliced in half by the golden flying sword, following which its 2 halves came plummeting straight down toward the ground. Impossible! Zenith Yin's expression changed drastically upon seeing this, and the ecstasy that was clouding his judgment was immediately dispelled. Within the stone chamber, the restriction on one's spiritual sense didn't have any effect, so he immediately sent his spiritual sense sweeping toward Han Li. In Han Li's eyes, Zenith Yin was already a dead man, so there was no need for him to hide his cultivation base. As such, he circulated his magic power with reckless abandon throughout his body. After detecting Han Li's cultivation base, a series of spectacular expressions flashed through Zenith Yin's face. He initially faltered before a confused look appeared on his face, followed by incredulity and a hint of horror. When he used his spiritual sense to verify Han Li's cultivation base again, his face immediately turned deathly pale. "You've already reached the late nascent soul stage." Zenith Yin spat through gritted teeth, as his entire body instantly became drenched in cold sweat. Han Li began to recall events of the past, and intense killing intent welled up in his heart as he said in a cold voice, "HMPH, what good will that knowledge do you? It's actually better to die as a fool. Seeing as you pursued me relentlessly to try and take my heaven-void cauldron, it's only fitting that I kill you with this cauldron." He then opened his mouth, and a ball of azure light shot forth, spinning on the spot before revealing itself to be a small, antiquated cauldron. It was none other than the heaven-void cauldron. Zenith Yin was astonished by the fact that Han Li had progressed to the late nascent soul stage, and even now, he still felt as if he were in a dream. However, he knew that he was in an extremely perilous situation after witnessing Han Li summon the heaven-void cauldron, and he certainly wasn't going to surrender. Thus, he gritted his teeth and abruptly spun on the spot. Bursts of inky black yin qi exuded from his body, encompassing most of the stone chamber in the blink of an eye. At the same time, intimidating ghostly figures began to emerge in the black mist amid bursts of ghastly screeching. Zenith Yin unleashed his profound yin devilish arts with all his might, while also releasing the 18 heaven-wide corpses that he had been refining for several centuries. However, he didn't dare to attack Han Li with devilish qi, which made him rather hesitant with regard to how to proceed. In response, Han Li merely chuckled coldly. Even though almost the entire stone chamber had been enshrouded in profound yin devilish qi, he could still see everything with great clarity using his spirit eyes. Thus, he didn't waste any time with words as he pointed a finger toward the heaven-void cauldron in front of him. Azure light flashed over the surface of the cauldron as clumps of azure threads shot forth. There seemed to be no end to the azure threads, and they formed a massive azure net in the blink of an eye before hovering in the air. Zenith Yin's heart sank upon seeing this, and he immediately began to chant an incantation. The devilish projections nearby flashed, and 18 heaven-wide corpses rushed out of the cloud of yin qi, heading directly upward while flailing their arms in an attempt to tear through the azure net. Han Li looked on expressionlessly as he flicked a finger toward the small cauldron before him. A faint clang rang out, and dazzling light suddenly erupted from the azure net. A layer of blue glacial flames abruptly appeared beneath the net, before transforming into a dozen or so shiny blue firebirds, all of which flew toward the oncoming corpses. The heaven-wide corpses didn't even get the chance to utter a single sound before they were reduced to 18 sinister ice sculptures by the blue flames. The ice sculptures then fell from above and were shattered into countless pieces. At this moment, the threads on the azure net suddenly shuddered as countless fist-sized blue fireballs hurtled toward the devilish qi down below. The black mist tumbled and surged violently before transforming into countless black pythons that rose up to meet the descending fireballs. As soon as the two came into contact with one another, the blue fireballs exploded on impact, sending a vast expanse of blue glacial mist spreading through the entire stone chamber. The temperatures in the stone chamber immediately plummeted as thick layers of ice materialized on the walls, floor, and ceiling. In the blink of an eye, the stone chamber had been completely transformed into a glacial realm. The black pythons were powerless in the face of the blue glacial mist and were reduced to countless ice sculptures, which then crumbled into countless fragments. The might of the blue glacial mist then vanquished all of the remaining devilish qi, revealing the indistinct figure of Zenith Yin underneath. Under such circumstances, Zenith Yin definitely wouldn't be able to last long at all. He was also aware of this himself, and he immediately let loose a shrill cry, and he blasted an inky black bead out of his mouth. As soon as the bead emerged, Zenith Yin bit through the tip of his tongue and threw up a mouthful of blood essence onto the bead. The bead immediately shuddered before transforming into a ball of devilish flames. The fireball revolved in a circle around Zenith Yin before transforming into a layer of pitch-black flames that enshrouded him within. This was none other than Zenith Yin's trump card, his heaven-wide corpsifier. After unleashing these flames, Zenith Yin's confidence was restored slightly. He swept up his remaining devilish chi before transforming into a ball of black flames and rushing toward the entrance of the stone chamber, appearing as if he were fleeing for his life. The heaven-wide corpsifier really was a force to be reckoned with. After coming into contact with these flames, the blue glacial mist emitted a dull thump and was unable to freeze Zenith Yin. After a few flashes, he managed to fly out of the blue glacial mist and instantly appeared near the entrance. Han Li's expression remained unchanged upon seeing this, but he internally activated his artifact imprint technique. Azure light suddenly erupted from the stone gate as countless azure threads shot forth from the nearby walls, interweaving with one another to create an impenetrable net. Arg! Zenith Yin's heart sank upon seeing this. Right at this moment, a frosty sensation suddenly surged toward him from above, and he looked up in shock and horror. A massive ice lotus was materializing overhead above the azure net. The lotus was entirely blue in color and extremely vibrant and beautiful. More importantly, it was encompassing Zenith Yin's entire body beneath it. Crap! A wave of shock surged through Zenith Yin's heart as he attempted to rush out of the lotus flower's range. However, right at this moment, two clumps of azure threads suddenly erupted from the ground upon which he was standing, binding themselves tightly around his feet. As a result, Zenith Yin was completely unable to escape. The azure threads continued up his calves, ensnaring his entire body in the blink of an eye. The black flames were still raging over his body, yet the threads were seemingly completely immune to this fire. Almost at the exact same moment, the blue ice lotus up above began to slowly descend. Zenith Yin was absolutely petrified upon seeing this. His heaven-wide corpsifier was indeed quite powerful, but there was no way it would be able to withstand the might of the celestial blue flames. In this dire situation, he opened his mouth and expelled a black jade pendant. However, before he could unleash the power of this treasure, more clumps of azure threads shot forth toward him from nearby. The small adept pendant was ensnared in a flash. Zenith Yin's heart jolted with shock, and he hurriedly attempted to activate the jade pendant with his spiritual sense. However, the azure threads around the pendant merely flashed, and his connection with the treasure was severed. The azure threads then dragged the jade pendant toward the heaven-void cauldron. The threads and the jade pendant flashed, and both were absorbed into the cauldron. An expression of despair appeared on Zenith Yin's face upon seeing this. He was unleashing his heaven-wide corpsifier with all his might, and summoned two other treasures to keep the ice lotus overhead at bay, but his struggles were ultimately proving to be futile. As soon as the blue ice lotus began to descend, a layer of blue flames erupted with the lotus at the very center. As soon as Zenith Yin's heaven-wide corpsifier came into contact with the celestial ice flames, the former was immediately warped and crushed. Following a string of loud bangs, the heaven-wide corpsifier was reduced to a pitiful state and appeared to be on the verge of being snuffed out. During this period of time, Zenith Yin unleashed several secret techniques in quick succession to try and struggle free from the azure threads binding his body, all to no avail. When the final wisp of heaven-wide corpsifier was snuffed out, the blue lotus flower finally descended. Despite Zenith Yin's desperate struggles, he was completely enshrouded in glacial power and completely frozen solid. His entire body was encapsulated in a block of blue ice that was several tens of feet tall, and an expression of shock and horror still lingered on his face. From the commencement of the battle all the way until Zenith Yin was captured, Han Li didn't use any treasure other than the heaven-void cauldron, and he didn't even move a single step from where he was standing. After Zenith Yin was sealed in ice, Han Li chuckled coldly as he flicked a finger toward the cauldron again. All of the azure threads in the stone chamber tremored in unison before returning to the cauldron as streaks of light, while spiritual light flashed incessantly over the surface of the cauldron. Han Li immediately opened his mouth upon seeing this to swallow the cauldron back into his stomach. He then turned his attention to Zenith Yin, who was trapped in the block of blue ice, and he chuckled as a hint of a smile appeared on his face. However, his eyes were extremely cold and completely devoid of emotion. Han Li drifted over to the blue ice sculpture, and a ringing sound erupted from his sleeve as a dozen or so golden flying swords shot forth. The flying swords circled through the air before elongating to several feet in length. They then aimed their sharp tips at the blue ice sculpture from all directions, appearing as if they were going to completely dismember Zenith Yin's body. Please wait, fellow Taoist Han. My entire family was slaughtered by this man. May I have the honor of putting an end to this man's life? A voice that was familiar to Han Li suddenly sounded from a corner of the stone chamber. Han Li stirred as he arrested the momentum of his flying sword and turned toward the source of the voice. Golden light suddenly shimmered beneath a thick layer of ice as a small fist smashed its way through the ice, causing the ice to shatter. A golden nascent soul emerged from within the ice before rising into the air and looking directly at Han Li. Man Huzi. Only then did Han Li notice the physical appearance of the nascent soul, a discovery that he was quite shocked to make. If his memory served correct, Man Huzi had almost reached the end of his lifespan when Han Li last saw him. Now, close to 200 years had passed by, so he should have passed away already. So how was it that his nascent soul continued to exist, and how had it been captured by Zenith Yin? Letter 1D68F, letter 1D563, letter 1D41E, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D430, letter 1D556, letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D5FA. In his confusion, Han Li set aside his intention to kill Zenith Yin right away. Instead, he began to carefully assess Man Huzi's nascent soul. All of a sudden, he raised a hand and feigned a grabbing motion. A large azure hand appeared above the nascent soul before swooping down like lightning, immediately ensnaring the nascent soul between his 5 fingers. Spiritual light was shimmering over his hand, and the nascent soul was completely unable to move. There's no need to be so cautious, fellow Taoist Han. In my current state, I won't even be able to use any teleportation techniques. How will I be able to escape? Man Huzi wasn't making any effort to try and struggle free from Han Li's grasp. HMPH, that may not actually be the case. I didn't think that you would survive for this long. I recall that back in the Heaven Void Hall all those years ago, you seem to have harbored ill intentions against me as well. Are you appearing before me now so I can send you on your way as well? Han Li asked with a dark expression. You've already reached the late nascent soul stage, so if you'd like to exact your revenge for what happened in the Heaven Void Hall, then you have every right to do so. However, you were only a mere core formation cultivator back then. I think anyone in my situation back then would have tried to hunt you down. Even if you don't kill me, I've already expended the last of remaining energy to break through that restriction just then, so my time in this world is very much limited. The nascent soul didn't appear to fear death at all. Han Li was silent for a moment before saying something that came as a huge surprise to Man Huzi. That's certainly true. In your current feeble state, it won't be long before your nascent soul dissipates. I'm not an ungrateful person. Even though you did harbor animosity toward me in the Heaven Void Hall, the royal scale plate you gave me saved my life once. As such, I won't put an end to your life here. Neither of us owes the other anything now. Man Huzi faltered initially upon hearing this before a wry smile appeared on his face as he replied, I didn't give you that treasure out of generosity or kindness. I was merely trying to use you. You don't need to pay that any heed. I don't care what your intentions were. The fact of the matter is that the royal scale plate really did save my life once. However, don't expect me to save you either. Whether you survive or die here will be entirely up to you. Han Li waved a hand, and the large azure hand in the air disappeared, freezing Man Huzi's nascent soul once again. He then turned his attention to the massive block of ice off to the side. Man Huzi's nascent soul took a deep breath before glaring at the frozen Zenith Yin as he asked again, Fellow Taoist Han, I have a blood feud with this Zenith Yin. Could you leave him to me and grant me my final wish to kill him before I die? I also have a vendetta against Zenith Yin, so I'll be the one to put an end to him. There's no need for you to intervene. Han Li immediately turned him down. I'm willing to offer some rare materials and my own secret technique tome in exchange for this opportunity. Man Huzi suddenly became extremely flustered upon hearing this, and he hurriedly offered a reward to try and change Han Li's mind. Han Li turned to look back at the nascent soul, and a faint smile appeared on his face. Tell me what your true intentions are. I'm not naive enough to believe that you'd be willing to pay such a heavy price just for revenge. If you tell me your true intentions and your plan isn't detrimental to me in any way, then I might agree to let you do the honors. Also, I'm very interested to hear how you were able to survive until this point and how you ended up in Zenith Yin's hands. I hope you can impart this knowledge upon me, Han Li said in a slow voice. Upon hearing this, the urgent expression on the nascent soul's face slowly disappeared and was replaced by a hesitant look. Man Husey heaved a long sigh and finally made up his mind. So be it. There's no need for me to keep this a secret from you. Let me tell you everything. I'd be honored to hear it, Han Li replied calmly. He then waved a sleeve toward the block of ice, upon which all of the golden flying swords were withdrawn by a burst of azure light, before disappearing into his sleeve in the blink of an eye. Man Husey began to tell his story through gritted teeth. You're actually aware of this already, fellow Taoist Han. Back over 100 years ago, I was already about to reach the end of my lifespan. I managed to obtain some pills and medicines that could extend my lifespan in the Heaven Void Hall, but that was only delaying the inevitable. The only reason why my nascent soul still exists is because Zenith Yin used a cruel secret technique to completely overexert my nascent soul's latent potential, thereby forcing me to survive through his torture. As a price for extending my lifespan, when my spiritual power runs out and my nascent soul dissipates in the end, my soul won't be able to exist in this world, so there's no chance of reincarnation for me. And Li didn't say anything in response. He knew that Man Husey was only building up context for the rest of his story. As expected, Man Husey required no encouragement as he continued. Back then, I obtained the Heaven Men pill from the Heaven Void Hall and lived the good life for a while. No one was actually going to challenge me just over a pill. However, good times never last. Just as I was about to reach the conclusion of my lifespan, the Archsaint of the Six Paths came to my residence and asked me to give my body to him after I died so he could cultivate his devilish arts with it. I naturally refused, and in the end, I was severely wounded by his 6 apex devil's art. Thankfully, I was able to unleash a secret technique and escape, but along the way, I bumped into that accursed Zenith Yin. This bastard saw through the fact that I was severely wounded and immediately attacked me. We battled for 3 days and 3 nights, but I succumbed to my injuries in the end, and my body was destroyed. That was how my nascent soul ended up in his hands. He had always yearned for my collection and that Heaven Men pill, so he imprisoned me for interrogation, all the way until now. Interrogation? Why didn't he use a soul search technique on you? Han Li was slightly surprised to hear this. Man Husey chuckled coldly before replying in a proud manner. If this were any other cultivator, even a late nascent soul great cultivator wouldn't be able to avoid the fate of having their soul forcibly searched. However, the heaven-bearing devil arts that I cultivated makes me immune to soul search techniques. With it, I can guard my spiritual sense resolutely within my soul, making it very difficult to forcibly extract. If he increases the power of his soul search technique, then my soul will be destroyed. He was never going to be able to find out my secrets. Such a secret technique exists. Han Li raised an eyebrow upon hearing this. He was rather interested in such a technique. Of course, do you think the heaven-bearing devil arts has a false reputation? It's just that I never made this known to the world. Zenith Yin couldn't do anything to me, so he could only use his corpseifier to torture my nascent soul from time to time. My eye won't fold that easily. In any case, even if I did tell him everything, I would only be destroyed anyway. However, it's been over 100 years since my nascent soul was forcibly enhanced by a secret technique, and I really am at the end of the road. Unless I unleash a secret technique to devour another nascent soul, reincarnation will definitely be beyond me. Even if I do manage to engulf a nascent soul, it's still yet to be seen whether I'll have a chance for reincarnation. At the conclusion of his story, Man Husey turned to glare at the frozen Zenith Yin, looking as if he wanted nothing better than to sink his teeth into Zenith Yin's flesh. I see. So you're planning to engulf Zenith Yin's nascent soul for a chance at a second life. I've heard of a secret technique like this, but it really is impossible to verify whether it's actually effective, Han Li murmured as he stroked his chin. Regardless of whether it works or not, it's my only opportunity, so I must at least try it. In any case, someone else may take my collection after I die anyway, so why not use it to exchange for a ray of hope for myself? Man Husey heaved a resigned sigh. That is indeed true. Do you still have that Heaven Men pill? Han Li asked. Not anymore. I took it as soon as I got out of the Heaven Void Hall, but unfortunately, it didn't have much of an effect on me at all. Zenith Yin could see that my cultivation base hadn't improved, so he thought that I never took the pill in the first place and had constantly been interrogating me about its whereabouts. Otherwise, he may not have had the patience to interrogate me for so long, Man Husey replied in an honest manner. Oh, is that really the case? A hint of surprise flashed through Han Li's eyes. Back when he had taken his Heavenman pill, it had had an extremely pronounced effect. However, Man Husey had already been reduced to such a pitiful state, so he most likely wasn't lying. As such, It appeared that the Heaven Men pill's effect on nascent soul cultivators was negligible. Of course, that could also be because the aptitude of man Hughesy's spiritual roots was quite good to begin with, so there wasn't much room for improvement. And Lee contemplated the situation for a while before giving his response. I can allow you to do as you please, but you have to give me a copy of the heaven-bearing devil arts first. After that, I'll leave Zenith Yin to you. I'm rather interested in the soul-locking secret technique you were referring to earlier. After you devour Zenith Yin's nascent soul, you can tell me about where the rest of your collection is. No problem. The nascent soul was overjoyed to hear this. And Lee nodded in response, but he could see that the nascent soul was very feeble. As such, he made a few hand seals and cast a few incantation seals onto the nascent soul's body in quick succession. Spiritual light of different colors shimmered over the nascent soul's body, upon which it was significantly reinvigorated. Thank you, fellow Taoist Han. Man Hughesy was very grateful for Han Lee's gesture. And Lee waved a hand before tossing a blank white jade slip through the air. The nascent soul hurriedly opened its little mouth to expel a burst of faint golden light. The jade slip was swept up in the golden light before rapidly shrinking to a size that could fit in the nascent soul's hand. After that, it lowered its head and began to replicate the devil arts. This was something that he had completely committed to memory, so replicating it was a piece of cake. 10 minutes later, the nascent soul opened its eye before raising a hand into the air. A streak of white light was sent flying toward Han Lee. Han Lee caught the white light, and spiritual light flashed as the jade slip reverted back to its original size. You haven't tampered with this, have you, brother man? Han Lee glanced at the jade slip before a half-smile appeared on his face. The nascent soul didn't know whether it should laugh or cry upon hearing this. Surely you jest, brother Han. With your current late nascent soul cultivation base, you'd be able to easily ascertain the authenticity of a cultivation art. Besides, I'm already in such a pitiful state. Why would I do something that harms you and doesn't benefit me in any way? Han Lee chuckled and didn't say anything else. The jade slip in his hand shuddered as he inserted his spiritual sense within. After reading through just a few sentences, Han Lee's expression suddenly changed drastically. There was an initial flash of surprise, followed by incredulity, then elation. Man Hughesy's nascent soul was rather perplexed by his reaction. However, it was indeed true that he hadn't tampered with the cultivation art, so he had no need to worry about anything. After 15 minutes, Han Lee had already finished reading through the jade slip, taking much less time than Man Hughesy had anticipated he would. Han Lee withdrew his spiritual sense from the jade slip, and his expression became rather confused. Brother man, where did you learn this heaven-bearing devil art? Do you know its origins? Han Lee asked. Origins? This is a renowned cultivation art in the scattered star seas that has been passed down for a long time. It's no less renowned than the arch-saint of the six paths, six apex devils art. It's just that this cultivation art has always been passed down to only one person per generation, and I only managed to learn it after I encountered my master. Why do you ask? Is there something amiss about this cultivation art? The nascent soul asked. No, no. Han Lee shook his head in response before flipping his hand over, upon which the jade slip disappeared. After witnessing the wide array of emotions Han Lee had just displayed, Man Hughesy certainly wasn't going to believe that. However, he didn't pry any further into the matter. Brother Han, if you don't have the time to cultivate this art, then just pass it on to any disciple of yours. The inheritance of the heaven-bearing devil arts must go on. His top priority was naturally to engulf Zenith Yin's nascent soul, so he immediately continued, seeing as you've already seen the cultivation art, would I be able to begin now? Red light flashed in the nascent soul's eyes, and a solemn look appeared on its face as it spoke. Han Lee glanced at the frozen Zenith Yin before a smile appeared on his face as he asked, Of course. You're a little feeble at the moment, though. Would you like me to assist you? Thank you for your kind offer, but that won't be necessary. My current magic power isn't comparable to even a tenth of what it once was, but it's still more than enough to handle an immobilized cultivator. Man Hughesy shook his head with a confident look. All right, then I'll be waiting outside. Han Lee smiled and didn't say anything further. His body swayed and he appeared at the entrance before slowly making his way out of the stone chamber. Thus, only Man Hughesy and the frozen Zenith Yin were left in the chamber. Man Hughesy turned to Zenith Yin and a sinister look appeared on his face. Zenith Yin was completely immobilized, but there was a horrified look in his eyes. Meanwhile, Han Lee was standing in the passageway outside the stone chamber, silently surveying the jade slip in his hand. The stone chamber was completely silent. After around 15 minutes, a weary voice sounded from within. "Fellow Taoist Han, you can come in now." The voice belonged to none other than Man Husey, but it was slightly hoarse. And Lee raised an eyebrow as he put his hands together, upon which the jade slip in his hand disappeared without a trace again. He then made his way into the stone chamber. The massive block of blue ice was still completely untouched, but Zenith Yin's eyes had already completely rolled over, and he was clearly very much dead. Meanwhile, the nascent soul was hovering over the block of ice. It had grown a little in size and was filled with vitality, creating a strong contrast with its previous feeble state. However, it wore an exhausted expression on its little face as it said, "You have my thanks, Brother Han. I've only temporarily recovered most of my energy, and I must take this opportunity to pass on to the afterlife. Otherwise, my efforts would all be wasted. My secret cave abode is located at." As the nascent soul began to disclose the location of its collection, it fell silent and began to transmit its voice to Han Li instead. Han Li listened carefully before nodding expressionlessly. The nascent soul exhaled and calmly said, "All right, I've exacted my revenge, so it's time for me to pass on now. Farewell, fellow Taoist Han." Its body then swayed as it flew toward a corner of the stone chamber, where it sat down with its legs folded in front of itself. Dazzling golden light erupted from the nascent soul's body, and its aura became extremely unsteady, oscillating between strong peaks and feeble troughs. A smile appeared on Han Li's face as he turned his attention away from Man Husey's nascent soul. Instead, he rubbed his hands together before raising them. A loud thunderclap erupted as several thick arcs of golden lightning struck the massive block of ice. The ice exploded amid a flurry of golden light, and Zenith Yin's frozen body was shattered into countless pieces. Han Li inspected the remains carefully to ensure that there wasn't a soul fragment or a second primal soul or something of that nature. After verifying that, he nodded with a content expression before turning away. Right at this moment, a series of cracks had already surfaced on the nascent soul's shimmering body. Golden light flashed from within the cracks, and it was as if golden liquid were about to spill out. Han Li's eyes narrowed as he stared intently at Man Husey's nascent soul, but he didn't say anything. Following a faint thump, the entire nascent soul exploded into specks of golden light before disappearing. After witnessing Man Husey's nascent soul passing on to the afterlife, Han Li heaved a faint sigh. He flicked a finger at Zenith Yin's remains on the ground, and a fireball shot forth, enshrouding everything in scorching flames. Han Li didn't stay behind to watch everything burn. He transformed into a streak of golden light before disappearing from the stone chamber in the blink of an eye. Han Li didn't need to fear anything when escaping from this place, so he traveled at full speed and quickly reached the end of the passageway. A stone wall that was shimmering with spiritual light stood in his way. Han Li immediately raised a hand without any hesitation. Golden light began to flash from his fingertip as he prepared to summon sword qi to slice through the wall. However, right at this moment, an earth-shattering boom suddenly erupted. The entire passageway began to tremor and quake while emitting a rumbling echo. Han Li was slightly surprised by this turn of event, but his hands didn't slow down in the slightest. Several streaks of golden light layered on top of one another before flying through the air and slicing through the stone wall. Han Li's body swayed, and he emerged on the other side. He had emerged on the first level of the pavilion, and the stone wall that he had just broken through was a secret door located in a corner of the pavilion. As soon as he emerged from the passageway, the rumbling and quaking were exacerbated by severalfold. There was raucous laughter, cries of rage, and loud explosions erupting outside. It was as if the entire stone peak had become a battlefield, and there were people engaged in battle outside. Han Li's brows furrowed, yet a streak of red light suddenly came flying into the pavilion from outside. Before the incoming cultivator had even identified the man inside the pavilion, he immediately began to yell bad news. "The demon beasts of the Ironstone Peak have suddenly—" "Eh, who are you? Where's Elder Wu?" The cultivator was stunned upon making the discovery that the man standing in the hall wasn't actually Zenith Yin. Han Li chuckled coldly before opening his mouth, upon which golden light flashed from within, and a cry of anguish rang out. The cultivator within the red light had been sliced in half before he even figured out what was going on. This Starfall Coalition Corps formation cultivator was very unlucky. He didn't even manage to get a good look at Han Li before his life was forfeit. However, Han Li roughly understood the situation from what the core formation cultivator had said prior to being killed. It appeared that the demon beasts in the sea had suddenly attacked the Starfall Coalition. He was rather confused about the situation, but he didn't want to get involved in these affairs. As such, he made a hand seal and withdrew his aura, completely concealing his presence. He then strutted straight out of the pavilion. However, before he had even reached the main gate, he heard a thunderous roar erupting from up above. Fellow Taoist Tang, our sea race has deployed a large number of metamorphosis stage brethren this time. There's no way your Starfall Coalition will be able to contend with us. If you're smart, you'd hand over that top-grade spirit stone right now. Perhaps we can consider letting you live then. The owner of the voice sounded rather wheezy and out of breath, yet he possessed an astonishing cultivation base. All of the low-grade Starfall Coalition cultivators outside the pavilion were struck by a sense of physical debilitation just by hearing this voice, and the spiritual power within their powers also congealed as a result. Han Li's heart jolted upon hearing the words, top-grade spirit stone. He immediately shot through the gates of the pavilion and looked up into the sky. A mass brawl was taking place there, and spiritual light was shimmering incessantly amid strings of resounding booms. There were several tens of cultivators engaged in intense battles with some strange-looking demon beasts. In the air above, blue cloud and mist had almost obscured the entire sky. Beneath the cloud and mist, there were also several battles taking place. There was a thin blue-robed elderly man holding an azure mirror in his hand, from which countless streaks of piercing azure light were hurtling through the air. In his other hand, he was wielding a blue flying sword that was as powerful as a raging flood dragon. Letter 1D65B, letter 1D493, letter 1D4E, letter 1D65A, letter 1D500, letter 1D486, letter 1D658, letter 1D490, letter 1D4AT. Before him stood an incredibly tall and portly mendicant. There was a golden ring around each of his two arms, and he was holding a round bowl in his hand. At the same time, he was expelling blue mist from his mouth, and was able to keep all of the blue-robed man's attacks at bay. The thunderous roars were coming from none other than that massive mendicant's mouth. Blue light flashed through his eyes as he appraised the mendicant, and he noticed several shimmering silver scales on his neck. Elsewhere, a man and a woman were battling a scholar with a pair of short horns on his head. There was also a gray-robed elderly man releasing gusts of yin winds from a gourd, and he was locked in an intense battle with a humanoid figure who was completely enshrouded in crimson flames. Slightly further away, there was a large cloud of crimson mist tumbling and surging incessantly, from within which indistinct roars and explosions could be heard. There seemed to be a fierce battle taking place in there as well. It was difficult to determine which side would be able to come out on top in this battle. However, it appeared that the Starfall Coalition had been correct to summon all of their nascent soul cultivators back to this island. Otherwise, the guards on the Stone Mountain would have been no match for this demon beast army. The blue-robed man's expression remained unchanged, yet he was injecting even more power into his treasure as he calmly said, "What top-grade spirit stone? Where did you hear this false rumor from? I don't have any top-grade spirit stones." "You're still trying to hide it from me now, Brother Tang. Don't you find that to be farcical?" Clouds of blue mist continued to pour out from the huge mendicant's mouth as a disdainful look appeared on his face. The blue-robed man's expression cooled even further as he replied, "So you really did come here based on a rumor alone? How can top-grade spirit stones exist in the human world? You arrived unannounced and unprovoked, killing so many of our Starfall Coalition cultivators. I won't allow you to get away with this." Even if you're willing to let us get away with this, we still won't rest until we get our hands on the spirit stone, Brother Tang. I discovered the news about the spirit stone by using a soul search technique on the person who discovered the spirit stone, so don't try to fool me." The fatso chuckled coldly as his flabby folds tremored incessantly. "So you were the ones who killed Protector Li?" The blue-robed fan faltered initially upon hearing this before flying into a thunderous rage. He waved his azure mirror through the air, and several thick pillars of light were launched toward his opponent. "So you're not going to deny your possession of the spirit stone anymore?" A deriding sneer appeared on the fatso's face as the round bowl in front of him blasted out a burst of yellow light, which absorbed all of the oncoming pillars of light. "So what if I do? Everyone knows that top-grade spirit stones are extraordinarily useful for breaking through bottlenecks. There's no way I'd hand it over to you demon beasts. Are you not afraid that the Star Palace will be the one to benefit from our battle in the end?" The blue-robed man's enraged expression faded as he quickly calmed down. Star Palace, you think it's just our sea race that's attacking your Starfall coalition. Let me tell you the truth. Our sea race has developed all of our most powerful beings this time, and not only are we going to take the top-grade spirit stone, we're going to take back all of the spirit mines on this island as well. The outer seas rightfully belong to our sea race. For you human cultivators to even think about taking a share of the spirit stones on this island is nothing more than a joke. We only allowed you to thrive for as long as you did because we hadn't yet gathered all of the forces we required. The fatso raised his flabby neck, and a peculiar expression appeared on his face. Elder Tang's expression changed drastically upon hearing this. All of a sudden, a burst of howling erupted in the distance, as if to support the fatso's claims. Another burst of blue demonic mist then came sweeping forth from that direction, seemingly containing countless demon beasts within. Haha, looks like the Star Palace cultivators have already been taken care of. As expected, mobilizing our troops before taking down one side first was the right course of action. None of you will be able to escape now. The fatso burst into raucous laughter upon seeing this. Large swathes of yellow light surged from his round bowl in a frenzy, hurtling directly toward the blue-robed man down below. At the same time, the golden rings around his arms also shot forth, before transforming into layers of projections and descending at a frenetic pace. Seeing as reinforcements had arrived, the demon beast immediately increased the intensity of his attacks, not allowing his opponent to get away. The blue-robed man's expression was twisted with shock and rage, yet he found himself unable to escape from his opponent. Similar scenes were unfolding in the other battles nearby as well. All of the metamorphosis stage demon beasts began to unleash torrential barrages of attacks without any consideration for their demonic power reserves. Spiritual light of all different colors intertwined as loud rumbling booms erupted. None of the Starfall Coalition nascent soul cultivators were able to shake off their opponents to get away from this place. On the other side, the cloud of blue demonic mist as approaching as fast as lightning, and in the blink of an eye, it had already drawn so close that the sinister features of the demon beasts within were clearly visible. Even the Starfall Coalition cultivators with the slowest reactions had realized that they were in deep trouble at this point. In the end, someone suddenly yelled, "Retreat!" All of the low-grade cultivators down below immediately fled in all directions, while the nascent soul cultivators in the air above all began a search for opportunities to extricate themselves from their respective battles. Some adopted a more defensive approach as they slowly retreated toward the stone peak, while others unleashed powerful attacks with all their might, hoping to temporarily force back their demon beast opponents before taking the opportunity to flee. There were also some who had secret techniques that could help them escape, so they were combating their opponents in a calm manner while scanning their eyes across their surroundings, seemingly in search of something. Meanwhile, Han Li was initially planning to get away, but those plans were immediately aborted upon hearing the words top-grade spirit stone. Even though he had never seen any legendary top-grade spirit stones, he had seen records of their miraculous effects in countless tomes. Setting aside the fact that the spirit stone was a compulsory item for setting up several types of legendary primordial formation spells in the human world, just its effect in assisting cultivators in breaking through bottlenecks alone was an extremely tempting prospect. Letter 1D557, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D556, letter 1D41E, letter 1D430, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D68C, letter 1D428, letter 1D696. Furthermore, this assistance effect was applicable to all cultivators from the core formation to the deity transformation stages. Of course, the more advanced one's cultivation base, the less pronounced the spirit stones effect would become. Even so, top-grade spirit stones were still extremely sought after among cultivators of the human world. Now that a top-grade spirit stone had been extracted from one of the mines here, it was no wonder that the Starfall Coalition was immediately gathering their nascent soul cultivators, while the demon beast didn't hesitate in the slightest to launch an attack against this island. Seeing as one top-grade spirit stone had been excavated from the mine, there would perhaps be a second or even a third one in the mine. Han Li took a deep breath and quickly made sense of the situation. Seeing as such a rare treasure had appeared before him, he certainly wasn't going to give up on it without a fight. However, it was a rather difficult predicament to identify just who was carrying the top-grade spirit stone. Theoretically, a treasure of this caliber naturally had to be assigned to the person with the highest cultivation base for safekeeping. In that case, the blue-robed man would fit the bill. However, it could also be the case that the blue-robed man had intentionally given the spirit stone to a certain nondescript low-grade cultivator, who would then sneak the spirit stone out of the island. If the latter strategy were employed, then no matter how powerful he was, he wouldn't be able to capture all of the Starfall Coalition cultivators, especially not with so many powerful demon beasts around as well. Han Li's brows furrowed as he carefully contemplated the situation, but his expression then immediately relaxed. The intelligence of those metamorphosis stage demon beasts definitely wasn't inferior to that of human cultivators, so they had most definitely already considered this problem as well. As such, even if he didn't do anything, the invading demon beasts definitely wouldn't allow any Starfall Coalition cultivators to escape, either. All he had to do was to swoop in and take the Spirit Stone as soon as it appeared. At his current power level, none of the demon beasts and cultivators here would be able to stop him. With that in mind, Han Li stood in front of the pavilion and continued to conceal his presence as he surveyed the battle with a cold expression. As expected, around 200 to 300 demon beasts suddenly rushed out from the demonic mist approaching from the distance, all of whom began to pursue the low-grade cultivators on the island. Most of these demon beasts were only at the 3rd or 4th grades, but there were also about a dozen or so 5th-grade demon beasts. All of the human cultivators were being pursued by a demon beast of a concurrent power level. In the face of such a formidable army, it really was rather implausible that any of the cultivators would be able to escape from the island. The blue demonic mist instantly arrived in the air directly above the battlefield, before merging with the original cloud of mist. A burst of extremely powerful demonic chi rose into the sky, following which a ball of golden flames shot forth from within. A brilliant light flashed before a demonic cultivator in a suit of golden plate armor appeared. The demonic cultivator had the head of a worm and the body of a human. It was wielding a golden spear, along which silver arcs of light were flashing, forming a long and thin lightning snake that flowed along the surface of the spear. It was quite apparent that this was no ordinary treasure. As for that suit of golden plate armor, it was constructed from countless golden scales, each and every one of which were carrying tiny runes that were emanating demonic chi. As soon as this demonic cultivator appeared, a burst of sharp light shot forth from its worm eyes as an extremely powerful spiritual sense instantly enshrouded the entire stone peak. All of the nascent soul cultivators were still engaged in heated battles with their respective demon beast opponents, and their hearts sank in unison. The blue-robed man's face turned deathly pale upon seeing this demonic cultivator, and he yelled with incredulity, "Golden Worm King! Impossible! How could you go against our agreement and come here in person? This worm was a 10th grade demon beast. Why can't I come here? If you want me to uphold the agreement, then you humans have to show me that you have what it takes. It's been 3,000 years since a deity transformation cultivator has appeared among your ranks, and a top-grade spirit stone is at stake here, so why should I uphold the agreement?" The worm spoke with a cold expression. Right at this moment, 2 more demonic cultivators emerged from the demonic mist. One of them was a black-robed being with red hair, a green face, and a mouthful of sharp fangs. It was quite tall and broad, and was somewhat familiar to Han Li. "Huh? Isn't that the demon tortoise that was with the savage flood dragon?" Han Li's heart jolted at the sight of the golden worm before a surprised look appeared on his face upon seeing the black-robed demonic cultivator. His expression immediately darkened as he hurriedly cast his gaze toward the demonic mist, but no other demonic cultivators emerged from within. Han Li's brows furrowed upon seeing this, but he didn't recklessly unleash his spiritual sense or spirit eyes to assess the situation. After all, a 10th grade demon beast's spiritual sense was extremely powerful. He could avoid being discovered by the Golden Worm King using his concealment technique, but he would be immediately exposed if he were to release his spiritual sense. Seeing as this Golden Worm King had appeared, the Starfall Coalition cultivators were most likely all going to be killed. However, it was rather surprising to Han Li to see the demon tortoise here with this Golden Worm King. Could it be that the latter was somehow related to the savage flood dragon? Upon hearing the Golden Worm King's declaration, panicked expressions appeared on the faces of all of the human cultivators on the stone peak, and the blur-robed man's heart sank even further. However, he was a mid-nascent soul cultivator, and he certainly wasn't going to give up so easily. All of a sudden, he let loose a shrill cry, and the blue flying sword that was wreaking havoc within the demonic mist suddenly exploded amid a loud boom. This flying sword was quite a powerful ancient treasure, and after being forcibly detonated by Elder Tang, the power it could unleash was simply unimaginable to normal cultivators. A massive ball of silvery white light appeared in the air above the stone peak, repelling all of the blue mist that was emanating from the fatso's mouth. The projections formed by his two golden rings were also destroyed with ease. The fatso's heart jolted with shock upon seeing this, and he hurriedly injected all of his power into the round bowl before him. The vast expanse of yellow light instantly transformed into a protective barrier of light in front of him. At the same time, he hurtled back in a rapid retreat. The blue-robed man took advantage of this opportunity to summon a purple handkerchief, which he immediately activated without any hesitation. The handkerchief transformed into a ball of purple light that enshrouded the blue-robed man before flying through the air as a purple streak of light, traveling so rapidly that it had covered a distance of over 200 feet in the blink of an eye. The blue-robed man's action seemed to have acted as a signal, prompting all of the other nascent soul cultivators to unleash incredible secret techniques. Some of them disappeared on the spot amid bursts of white light. Some of them threw up mouthfuls of blood essence and fled into the distance as streaks of crimson light. In any case, all of them fleeing with all their might, even if doing so necessitated the infliction of severe self-harm. HMPH. A cold harumph rang out in the air as a frosty look appeared on the golden worm king's face. It waved a hand, and a loud thunderclap erupted, following which a streak of golden and silver light shot forth through the air. The demonic cultivator had hurled its golden spear directly toward the blue-robed man. As soon as the spear left its hand, it disappeared in the flash. Crab. The blue-robed man was paying close attention to the golden worm king, and his heart shuddered upon seeing this as he immediately tossed his azure mirror behind him. Azure light erupted, creating the projection of a full moon that was several tens of feet in diameter. The moon projection was azure in color and encapsulated the blue-robed man's body within. Almost at the exact same moment as the moon projection's emergence, a golden spear that was over 100 feet in length appeared nearby. Silver lightning flashed along the spear before striking the very center of the azure moon. The surface of the azure moon cracked like a mirror, and as the huge spear continued onward, the moon projection was completely destroyed. Arg! The blue-robed man was extremely alarmed to see this, and the purple light on his body swayed as he attempted to unleash a secret technique to get away. However, right at this instant, the huge spear shrank to about half its size and shot forth from within the remnants of the moon projection before striking the purple light in the flash. A resounding boom erupted. The handkerchief was quite a powerful treasure in its own right, as evidenced by the fact that the purple light it was manifesting was able to keep the spear at bay. Even so, the blue-robed man felt as if he had been dealt a heavy blow and was completely unable to control his own body as he was sent flying for several tens of feet. The golden worm king raised a leg and somehow managed to cover a distance of over 100 feet with a single step. Its body only had to flash through the air a few times before it caught up to the blue-robed man before reaching out with its hand. Golden light shimmered over its 5 fingers, making it appear as if they were constructed from pure gold. The blue-robed man had only just recovered slightly from the last attack when he caught sight of the golden worm king reaching for him from nearby. In his panic, he hurriedly opened his mouth to blast out a ball of green light. It was a green fist-sized bead. The golden claws clashed with the green bead amid a loud clang, as well as the loud, ear-splitting screech of metal scraping against metal. The green bead instantly expanded drastically, attempting to free itself from the golden worm king's hand. A cold light flashed through the golden worm king's eyes as nails of several feet in length abruptly sprouted from its 5 fingers. At the same time, a golden scale of roughly the same size as a copper coin appeared on the back of his hand. Following a dull thump, it was able to crush the bead with its bare hand. A burst of piercing green light flashed past, yet the golden claws remained completely unscathed. The dragonification arts, the blue-robed man exclaimed in the same instant that the bead was destroyed. At the same time, he threw up a mouthful of blood essence due to the backlash he had incurred from having his magic treasure destroyed. However, the exchange did buy him some allowing him to rush through the air again and opening up a distance of over 100 feet in the blink of an eye. On this occasion, the golden worm king didn't set off in pursuit again. Instead, its expression darkened slightly as it slowly threw a fist at the streak of purple light in the distance. A huge golden fist around 10 feet in size suddenly appeared in the air directly above the purple light, before crashing down at the speed of lightning. Following a thunderous boom, the blue-robed man was struck down by the massive fist, plummeting like a meteorite toward the stone peak. His body crashed straight through a pavilion, leaving a huge gaping hole several tens of feet in diameter in his wake, before being inundated by countless fragments of rubble. A cold smile appeared on the Golden Worm King's face. Its body swayed, and in the next instant, it appeared directly in front of the huge hole in the pavilion's wall. It raised an arm, and shiny golden light erupted from its palm, as it prepared to put an end to the blue-robed man's life. However, right at this instant, his expression changed and he abruptly feigned a grabbing motion toward the gates of the pavilion. As he did so, he yelled, "Who's there? Show yourself." 5 golden claw projections streaked through the air before disappearing into the ground. 5 trenches, each several tens of feet in length, were gouged into the ground in front of the pavilion. The trenches were incredibly deep, yet they didn't strike any target aside from the ground. A hint of bewilderment flashed through the Golden Worm King's eyes up seeing this. A moment ago, he had suddenly been struck by a hint of fear without any premonition. This bone-chilling sensation sent a shiver running down his spine, and he lashed out without any hesitation. He hadn't actually discovered anything. It was his instinct as a heavenly spirit beast that had prompted him to attack in a reflexive manner. During his tens of thousands of years of cultivation, this sense of foreboding had saved his life on several occasions. However, now that the attack had failed to strike any target, the Golden Worm King was left feeling a little hesitant, wondering if that sensation had merely been a figment of his imagination. After all, that sense of foreboding had proven to be incorrect on several occasions in the past. It was just that the chilling sensation that he had just experienced was a little too strong, as if there were some sort of extremely dangerous being spying on him from the shadows, and even now, there was still fear lingering in his heart. Just as he was considering widening the scope of his search, a pile of rubble at the foot of the massive hole in the pavilion suddenly stirred before reverting back to normal. However, that split second of abnormality was enough to draw the Golden Worm King's attention. He scanned his gaze across the pile of rubble beneath him, upon which a flash of killing intent surfaced on his face. He immediately reached out and feigned a grabbing motion. Following a resounding boom, that golden spear appeared once again with lightning snakes arcing over its surface. He grabbed the spear before viciously swinging it downward. Arcs of silver light flashed as the spear transforming into a streak of blinding golden light, hurtling downward before disappearing midway again. When it was revealed once again, the spear had already plunged into the ground in a certain spot over 200 feet away from the pavilion. The golden spear disappeared into the ground with a loud boom. A muffled groan then rang out as the ground nearby completely crumbled. Countless rock fragments shot forth in all directions, from within which a streak of purple light emerged. The purple light contained none other than the blue-robed man. However, at this moment, the blue-robed man's face was extremely pale, and there was blood trickling down the corner of his lips. The brightness of the purple light over his body was also oscillating sporadically, looking as if it were about to crumble at any moment. The purple light was indeed quite powerful, but after taking several heavy attacks from the Golden Worm King, it was finally about to give out. As soon as the blue-robed man was forced to reveal himself, he fled in a panic frenzy away from the stone peak. The sinister smile on the Golden Worm King's face widened, and he reached out again, upon which the golden spear materialized out of thin air. He then waved his arm through the air again to launch the golden spear. The speed of the fleeing blue-robed man had already decreased drastically, and even though he summoned a shield and metal ruler to defend himself, those 2 treasures were completely ineffective in the face of the golden spear. 2 loud booms erupted in quick succession as the 2 treasures were destroyed, while the golden spear continued onward. The blue-robed man tried to evade with all his might, but the spear was simply far too fast for him to avoid. In the end, the golden spear punctured the feeble layer of purple light and pierced through his chest. The blue-robed man let loose a howl of anguish before plummeting down from above. He crashed straight to the ground, where he lay, completely stationary. A charred black hole with a diameter comparable to the size of a bowl had appeared on his chest. Several thin arcs of lightning were flashing incessantly around the wound, and the smell of charred flesh wafted through the air. The Golden Worm King raised a hand to summon the golden spear back to him as he harumphed coldly. "HMPH, you think a mid-nascent soul cultivator like you can escape from me? What a joke." He then swept his arm through the air again, and several fingernails shot forth, expanding drastically during their descent. In the blink of an eye, they had swelled to become huge golden nails around a foot in length before pinning the blue-robed man's limbs and neck firmly to the ground. Runes began to flash over the nails as several golden chains emerged, forcibly sealing the blue-robed man in place in order to prevent his nascent soul from escaping. The Golden Worm King feigned a grabbing motion toward the blue-robed man, drawing the storage pouch hanging from his waist toward him. He then swept his spiritual sense through the contents of his storage pouch, upon which his expression immediately darkened. He raised his head with a dark expression as he swept his gaze around him. A short while later, two of the other fleeing nascent soul cultivators had been caught up in battles against demon beast opponents again, while a gray-robed, gourd-wielding cultivator and a cloud of blood mist fled into the distance. In the blink of an eye, they had already become two black spots on the horizon. There were demon beasts flying toward the gray-robed man in hot pursuit, yet the cloud of blood mist was getting further and further away from his demon beast opponents, traveling at a far faster speed than his pursuers. The Golden Worm King's lips twitched as he looked at the cloud of blood mist in the distance. He contemplated momentarily before his body flashed through the air, transforming into a streak of golden light as he hurtled toward the blood mist. As the golden light flashed into the distance, Han Li heaved a faint sigh of relief as he stood behind the pavilion gates. When the blue-robed man had been sent flying into the pavilion, he had been tempted to quickly subdue him before searching to see if he were carrying the top-grade spirit stone. However, he deemed that to be too risky in the end, and refrained from doing so. To his surprise, the Golden Worm King's spiritual sense was able to detect something during Han Li's split second of indecision. The attack he had unleashed almost managed to strike Han Li. Thankfully, he had mastered his teleportation technique to an extremely high degree, thereby allowing him to soundless travel to the other side of the pavilion gates, causing the Golden Worm King to miss his attack. From the Golden Worm King's expression, it appeared that the top-grade spirit stone wasn't in the blue-robed man's storage pouch, and nor could he possibly be carrying the spirit stones on his body somewhere. After all, if an item with such pure spiritual chi weren't placed in a storage pouch, anyone would be able to identify its whereabouts. Han Li paid no heed to the blue-robed man on the ground and turned his attention to the air above. Beneath the blue demonic mist, there was only an unidentifiable 8th-grade demonic cultivator. He was hovering in the air, completely still, seemingly having been left behind by the Golden Worm King to oversee the situation on the stone peak. This demonic cultivator's face was of a faint blue hue and his facial features were quite sinister. There were also large patches of blue scales on his arms and legs, giving him an extremely ghastly appearance. All of a sudden, he turned his gaze toward a certain direction. Han Li stirred upon seeing this, and also turned his attention toward the same direction. A ball of light yellow light was flying over from the distance, within which there seemed to be a demon beast that was carrying something. A blue light flashed through Han Li's eyes, as he unleashed his bright-sight spirit eyes to survey the demon beast within the yellow light. This was a strange demon beast with the appearance of a seahorse, but it also had 4 arms. All 4 of its hands were cradling an azure storage pouch, and there was elation on its hideous features. Han Li's pupils contracted minutely upon seeing this. Right at this moment, the blue demon beast that was hovering in the sky began to converse with the 4-armed demon beast through voice transmission, following which an excited look also appeared on its face. Its body flashed through the air, and it flew toward the 4-armed demon beast as a streak of blue light. After witnessing the joy on the 8th-grade demon beast's face, the final hint of hesitation disappeared from Han Li's heart. He immediately relinquished his concealment technique, and a thunderclap erupted behind him as his thunderstorm wings appeared on his back, following which he abruptly disappeared. After flashing through the air several times, Han Li appeared over 10,000 feet away as an arc of silver lightning. A booming thunderclap rang out, and he abruptly appeared above the 4-armed demon beast. Arg! The 4-armed demon beast was also quite alert. Upon arriving at the realization that it was being attacked, it immediately opened its mouth, from within which a dense expanse of yellow light came surging forth. At the same time, it transformed into a streak of yellow light and changed directions, skirting around Han Li in the air and flying directly toward the 8th-grade demon beast. It appeared that this demon beast knew that Han Li was far too powerful for it to handle, so it showed no intention of engaging in battle with him. However, this was but a mere 6th-grade demon beast, so there was no way it was getting away from Han Li. Thus, he immediately ignored the thunderous roar of rage from the 8th-grade demon beast as he swept a sleeve through the air, summoning a vast expanse of azure light. The spots of yellow light, of which there were over 100, were easily brushed aside by the azure light, and they fell from the sky as thin yellow needles. At the same time, Han Li raised his other arm and feigned a grabbing motion toward the four-armed demon beast. A scene akin to how the Golden Worm King handled the blue-robed man ensued. Azure light flashed above the demon beast's head as a huge azure hand was manifested. The hand came crashing down like lightning and ensnared the demon beast in the blink of an eye, making it feel as if its soul were about to escape its body from sheer horror. Golden light flashed violently and erratically over its body, as its four arms abruptly transformed into four sharp blades, which he used to hack viciously against the large azure hand. However, a technique unleashed by the late nascent soul stage, Han Li certainly wasn't going to be broken by a mere sixth-grade demon beast. The blades were attacking the azure hand relentlessly, yet the latter remained completely unscathed. Han Li raised an eyebrow as a cold expression appeared on his face. He brought together the 5 fingers on his outstretched hand, and the huge azure hand also clamped its fingers together, upon which a howl of anguish abruptly rang out. The four-armed demon beast had quite a sturdy body for a being of its level, but there was no way that it would be able to defend itself from a late-nascent soul cultivator's attack, and its body was forcibly clamped into several segments. Almost at the exact same moment, Han Li disappeared on the spot as an arc of silver lightning again. In the next instant, he appeared beside the demon beast's mutilated corpse before grabbing its azure storage pouch. He then quickly swept his spiritual sense through the contents of the pouch, and a delighted look appeared on his face. "Leave that spirit stone." A rumbling roar erupted from nearby. Han Li had appeared out of nowhere, killed the four-armed demon beast, and taken the treasure that the entire demon beast army had been searching for. In the aftermath of all this, it wasn't difficult to imagine the rage coursing through the 8th-grade demon beast's heart. As such, it immediately let loose a roar of thunderous fury. Furthermore, it had injected its magic power into the roar, making it audible to all of the demon beasts in a radius of several tens of kilometers. Han Li's brows furrowed as he turned toward the demon with an expression that was cold to the extreme, as if he were appraising a dead man. Blue light flashed, and the demon beast was drawing close to Han Li. However, the glare that Han Li directed at it made it feel as if it had been plunged into a glacial pit. The demon beast was extremely alarmed and immediately stopped cold in its tracks. Only then did it remember to assess Han Li's cultivation base with its spiritual sense, upon which it abruptly drew a sharp breath. "You're a late-nascent soul cultivator. Who are you?" The 8th-grade demon beast took an involuntary step backward as it hurriedly flipped a hand over, summoning toe shell-like treasures. It held the treasures up in front of itself as an expression of shock and horror flashed through its eyes. "Who am I? Why should I answer to a dead person?" Han Li turned his gaze from the demon as he surveyed his surroundings. It appeared that the roar it had unleashed had taken effect. In the distance, 2 metamorphosis stage demon beasts were locked in heated battles with a male and a female cultivator, yet they immediately ditched their opponents, transforming into 2 clouds of azure demonic wind as they rushed toward Han Li. Even further in the distance, golden light was flashing amid indistinct thunderclaps. That Golden Worm King was also on its way back. With that demon beast's fearsome speed, it would only take it an instant to return to this place. Han Li contemplated the situation as a cold smile appeared on his face. He put away the storage pouch before flipping his hand over to summon a green wooden ruler. Upon seeing this, the 8th-grade demon beast immediately activated its shell-like treasures without any hesitation. White light flashed over the surfaces of the 2 shells, forming a resolute barrier of light that shielded the demon beast within. The demon was feeling quite relieved after adopting those defensive measures. However, a deriding sneer appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. He gently waved the wooden ruler through the air and green spiritual light flashed as the sound of Buddhist chants erupted from above the demon beast. A silver lotus that was several tens of feet in diameter appeared, from which 7-colored Buddhist light came raining down in a frenzy. The 8th-grade demon beast's body swayed as it reflexively attempted to evade the Buddhist light. However, a horrifying scene then ensued. The air around it suddenly tightened as an immense invisible force descended upon its body, making it unable to move so much as a single finger. After being enshrouded under the Buddhist light, its spiritual power also congealed, rendering it completely unable to use its power. Arg! The demon beast only had the chance to cry out in shock and horror before a streak of golden light, around 10 feet in length, came hurtling toward it. The golden light only flew in a few circles around the barrier of light, upon which the light barrier emitted a cracking sound as it completely fell apart. The golden light flashed past right before the demon beast's horrified eyes. In the next instant, its body had been sliced in half and the two halves plummeted directly toward the ground. However, a ball of green flames suddenly shot forth from the mutilated body. A loud thunderclap erupted as Han Li abruptly appeared near the two halves of the body before pointing a finger at the green flames. The green light shuddered slightly and was forcibly locked in midair by Han Li's immense spiritual power. With his other hand, Han Li summoned an azure jade vial. From within a burst of white light emerged. The white light surged through the air before sweeping up the green flames and drawing it into the vial. Right at this moment, the other two demon beasts had also drawn quite close to Han Li, but their hearts shuddered in unison upon witnessing him making short work of that 8th-grade demon beast before taking its soul. The two demon beasts hurriedly stopped in their tracks before turning to look at one another, seeing their own horror mirrored in each other's eyes. At this moment, the figure approaching from the distance was becoming clearer, and as expected, it was indeed the Golden Worm King. There were also clouds of demonic mist of all different colors approaching from other directions. It seemed the other powerful demon beasts were also rushing back. Han Li contemplated the situation momentarily before murmuring to himself, "Seeing as I've already obtained the Spirit Stone, it's best not to take any unnecessary risks." With that in mind, a smile appeared on Han Li's face, and he flew into the distance was a streak of azure light. "Stop him!" The Golden Worm King was still several thousand feet away, yet it had already issued an absolute command. The other two demon beasts couldn't just stand by idly any longer. If the top-grade Spirit Stone were to be taken right before their very eyes, they would be punished severely. As such, they could only follow the order, making hand seals to summon two azure windworms that threw themselves at Han Li in a vicious manner. However, Han Li chortled boisterously as he disappeared on the spot, appearing over 200 feet away in the next instant as an arc of silver lightning. Only then did he continue to fly through the air as a streak of silver light, and the two windworms were completely unable to match his speed. "Leave the Spirit Stone behind." A vicious light suddenly flashed through the Golden Worm King's eyes as he hurled his golden spear from afar. Han Li faltered slightly upon seeing this. A thunderous boom erupted and the golden spear flashed several times in quick succession, taking it to less than 400 feet away from Han Li. When the spear disappeared once again, Han Li had already reverted back to his normal expression. His fleeing figure stalled momentarily as he flipped his hand over to summon a small silver shield, which then rapidly expanded to around 10 feet in diameter. Almost at the exact same moment, the golden spear appeared around 10 feet away from Han Li. Lightning flashed, and the spear struck the silver shield at an incredible speed. A loud clang rang out as golden and silver light intertwined, and neither side was able to overwhelm the other. The Golden Worm King also stopped in midair as he hurriedly cast an incantation seal. A silver lightning snake shot forth from the spear amid a rumbling thunderclap, circling around the shield and heading directly toward Han Li. "HMPH, what a pathetic little trick," Han Li harumphed as he reached out with his bare hand. He didn't appear to be moving all that quickly, but his hand managed to grab onto the silver lightning snake's neck with unerring accuracy. At the same time, an explosive boom erupted from his entire arm, following which golden arcs of lightning began to appear. The golden arcs surged down his arm in a frenzy, destroying the silver snake in one fell swoop. In the distance, the Golden Worm King's expression changed slightly upon seeing this. However, Han Li didn't stop there. After destroying the lightning snake, he slammed a palm into the silver shield before him. A layer of piercing silver light immediately surfaced over the shield, making it as smooth as a mirror. The golden spear tremored and was repelled by the silver light as it was sent flying over 80 feet away. Han Li took advantage of this opportunity to fly toward a certain direction as a streak of azure light. However, he wasn't conserving his spiritual power in the slightest this time. After unleashing his maximal speed, the streak of azure light covered a distance of over 1,000 feet in the span of a few breaths. Coincidentally, there was a black streak of light containing a demon beast flying directly toward him, and it was none other than that demon tortoise that had accompanied the Golden Worm King. Han Li was traveling far too quickly for the demon tortoise to get a clear look at his appearance. However, it had witnessed Han Li slaying an 8th-grade demon beast before blocking an attack from the Golden Worm King with ease. As such, The demon tortoise's expression changed drastically upon seeing Han Li flying in its direction. It immediately changed directions in an attempt to avoid Han Li. Cold light appeared in Han Li's eyes upon seeing this, and the azure light around him suddenly flashed violently before vanishing. The vast expanse of space before him suddenly became completely empty. The demon tortoise couldn't help but falter upon seeing this, and it slowed down slightly in the process.